This is the MeatEater podcast coming at you shirtless, severely bug-bitten, and in my case, underwearless.
We hunt the MeatEater podcast.
You can't predict anything.
The MeatEater podcast is brought to you by First Light. Whether you're checking trail cams, hanging deer stands, or scouting for elk, First Light has performance apparel to support every hunter in every environment. Check it out at firstlight.com. FIRSTLITE.com. Oh, you know what I wish I could make? You know, at the where Matthew plays soccer.
Yeah.
They have these bathrooms in there. They're like the most indestructible.
Like made out of some synthetic material.
Oh yeah, like welded stainless urinals and like just like caulking. I mean, you could go in there with a pressure washer.
Yep.
That is a bathroom, man.
Here's a quick urinal story for you.
No, please.
Love it.
Have you ever fished anyone out of a vault?
This sounds like we should be recording. Oh, we are recording.
Oh,
We are.
Phil, can you turn the machine on?
Machine's on.
So
Okay.
Not Phil's first.
Can you make a point to start it with this urinal story?
Will do.
So the computers we use at work are tough books. So they're big tanks. They're 10 pounds. They're
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Montana Game Warden Adam Pankratz telling you this story. We'll introduce him more thoroughly in a minute.
So these computers they're tough books. You can supposedly drive a tank over them, shoot them, whatever. They're laptops that are meant to be used in the field.
Uh-huh.
So if you drop your laptop, more than likely the screen's going to break. Ours, hopefully, it won't.
Yep.
Well, we were doing training in a Montana city here in Region 3 using a public meeting room. And one of our wardens was using the bathroom, using the urinal, and I think he had his tough book tucked under his arm as he was using the urinal standing there. At some point, the computer slips from his hands, drops to the floor, bounces up so hard, hits the bottom of the urinal, and shatters the porcelain urinal in the public restroom.
Ladies and gentlemen, brought to you by Tough Book.
That's a good twist.
Yeah, that's great.
So
man.
then I had to go explain to the host, the person who runs the facility, thank you for letting us use your facility for our training meeting. However, we destroyed one of your urinals with our computer.
A laptop destroyed your urinal.
Was the
That
laptop
does
fine?
not speak
The
well.
laptop was fine, but urinal
That
completely
does not
shattered.
speak well to the urinal company.
We've never used that building since then. I'm sure we're welcome back, but
Well, the problem you have that you might not realize is there's no way that they believe you that that's what happened.
what?
No, they immediately
like,
got on the
oh,
radio.
yeah,
They're like,
they-
we got
they-
some vandalism.
Yeah,
in here?"
then they kind of tried to tell me it was a laptop.
Well, it's in the town of West Yellowstone. I think they're kind of used to it. If you've ever been down there and you see some of the signs in the public bathrooms directing people like not to stand on toilets down there and stuff because of cultural differences and how they use toilets.
yeah.
And so they are constantly having toilets broken down there based on just people misusing or not using toilets
Yeah, my
correctly.
culture is like that old SNL commercial where they're all disposable. So every time I use one, I then break it.
Joined today by Adam Pankratz, Montana Game Warden. Give your specific. Do you guys call it rank? What do you guys call it?
Yeah, we have ranks.
Or title? What's your? Give me your official title.
So I'm a game warden captain for Southwest Montana. There's 8 captains that run different parts of the agency or different areas. So Southwest Montana is mine. We have game wardens. We have regional investigators, sergeants, captains, assistant chief. Those are kind of all of our ranks spread out through the state.
If there's 7 regions, why is there 8?
The 8th one is our investigative unit.
I see.
So there's a captain who kind of runs our investigative unit. So there's regional investigators, which are kind of like detectives that work in the region, and then we have an investigative squad up in Helena too.
And those detectives are playing some kind of like plainclothes detective.
Yep, correct.
And they work on more longer term.
Yep. So longer term wildlife cases, commercial cases, those type of things. So we have field wardens who are out there in the field in uniform, and then a plainclothes kind of unit that helps out with stuff long term, takes over cases when they go multi-county, multi-district across the state, maybe multi-state, all those type of things.
You know what I wish we would have done? Know how to do this next time? We should do a thing. We've always talked about having call-in capabilities. We should do a thing, ask a game warden. Just had the lines open.
I was thinking we should have just solicited the whole office for questions and just did nothing but questions.
So a bunch
today.
of people would be, like we keep joking, like a bunch of people would be like, so a friend of mine.
Hypothetically.
An old friend of mine.
I got one.
We don't
I'm
talk
asked
anymore.
later.
Yeah, pulling into the parking lot and seeing that game warden truck, I about backed out. I was like, oh, that's right.
Well, how about our buddy Stuart down there at Crooked Sky? Remember who lives across the street?
Yeah. Oh, we haven't talked about this. We need to talk about this. About that and then the other thing.
Which is our big trip?
Yeah, the main thing is he's an outfitter. He's an outfitter, and he literally is across the street.
Did he choose that? Did he move there
No,
first?
he was there before. Wasn't he there before they were?
The warden moved in. Yeah.
So he says there's two ways of looking at it. One, you got to keep on the up and up, or you're just hiding in plain sight. And they'll just assume, well, that guy over there, there's no way he's going to do something bad.
Yeah. So you guys could prescribe to keep your enemies close. Is that what you're telling me?
When
This happened to him. He did not pick the spot, but we had a good laugh about it.
when I was doing a deal with Idaho Fish and Game a couple years ago, they had a case study on using like over-the-counter trackers, GPS trackers, for the first time. And these research things out on the prairie kept disappearing, very expensive. Plus, they were there doing, I think, sage grouse research maybe, and they put, like an Apple tracking device or, one of the over-the-counter little trackers that you can keep on your phone. And the warden who was in charge of this case was super annoyed with it because it would go off anytime there was like a strong wind on the prairie. The piece of merchandise would shake and it would alert on his phone, and he started going out there and nothing would happen. And then sure enough, at like the very end of the season, like the onset of winter, the thing goes off on his phone and he's like, oh, that is right next to my house. And his next door neighbor was the person. Like like very rural part of Idaho, but like the third house up on the street is the person that this guy had spent like 2 years trying to catch. And they go, and what it was a solar powered hot fence units, but had some other fancy stuff in there for this research deal. And this gentleman had decided they would be better served, repurposed to run a hot fence around his chicken coop.
Sure. Why not? Years ago, I was working on a story about livestock theft, a magazine feature about livestock theft, and I was with these rural crime investigators. And remember when scrap got super high? Like one of the times scrap
metal
got super high. It was so bad, he said they would just go and throw tracking devices into irrigation pipe.
And just wait.
Because you just knew.
Yeah.
If you told a guy like, oh yeah, just stack a bunch of irrigation pipe by the road and we'll throw a sensor in there. Sure enough. It's like when it was hot, it was hot. On in the rural crime task force. Another thing, we covered this years ago. Do you remember the guy that they were doing the turkey banding? They had turkeys with tracking devices on them. And they one day get a turkey, going down the highway. And he says it winds up. They wind up tracking down this turkey, and he's walking around and realizes that, hey, this turkey is hiding under a big pile of firewood. It was their dead turkey. Some guy must have realized they had the sensor and somehow thought that like burying it in firewood would take care of the problem.
On his own place.
Yeah, it was on his place, and he got scared and buried it in under a pile of firewood like that would like disturb the transmission of the signal or something. And there was another guy that wrote in at the same time. I think maybe it would have been the same turkey study. They found one of their turkeys. They tracked it to a hotel. And it was with a gentleman in a hotel.
Picked it up off like Craig's book or Craigslist.
No, he had brought the turkey.
No, you know how those seedy hotel things happen, right?
That's how conspiracy theories about like people that are like, oh, they got trackers and the animals all over the place. Like, you hear like weird conspiracy theories about when people poach deer, like they know where, you know.
Oh, did you know there's a new one floating around out there right now that someone just asked me about? This is the best one yet. That they're giving, in order to get conservative rural people to take the vaccine, they're putting the vaccine into deer.
Oh, yeah.
And then you eat the deer meat. I'm like, that's mighty efficient.
Yeah. Get your protein and your vaccine at the same time.
That's a very efficient way to administer this. A buddy of mine texted me like, hey, man, do you think this is true? Denver, Colorado, MeatEater Live Tour. Some of this is going to be sold out by now, I think. MeatEater Live Tour starts December 6th.
Hold on, before you start this, do you have all your notes in front of you?
This is going to be the best one I do yet.
Good.
I got it pulled up in front of me. This
Sorry
is going to be a rousing one. What is MeatEater Live, you might ask? Well, it's a bunch of things. One thing it starts out as a concert. So you go down and our very own Chester Floyd, Chester the Midwester, who has opened now for Trampled by Turtles. He's a famous musician. Chester the Midwester is going to do a song to kick things off, like he did at the last live show he did was in Billings. We just did a one-off in Billings, Montana, and we just had the random idea to have Chester open the show. So Chester's going to open the show. We'll have some Chester concert tickets there. We're going to talk about news, funny stuff, slideshows, trivia components. We have guests joining us. We just signed up another great guest for one of the shows coming up. So we got like Kevin. These are all people I've sort of texted with, but we haven't finalized everything. But
so hopefully they're listening.
Kevin Murphy's going to be joining us on some of the nights. Janis Putelis is there every night. Ryan Callaghan's there some of the nights. Clay Newcomb's there some of the nights. We got some one-off people. We got Derek Wolf, Jason Fisher. I talked to him. We haven't formalized it, but the We Got Weights and Fish Walleye Tournament administrator is going to join us in Cleveland. All kinds of stuff. I got buddies from back home. They're going to join us on some of our Michigan shows. So every night there's stuff. There's trivia components. We decided on this last night. It's going to go like this. We're going to have audience members selected to come up and play trivia and win stuff. So when you go there, we're going to sell our new trivia board game, which is available right now. You can go buy it right now. We're going to sell our new trivia board game at the events. Select trivia board games are going to have a secret thing. If you get the select trivia board game with the secret thing, you come up on stage, and then you got to win a casting contest. Spinning rod. We were going to have multiple. We were going to have fly, spinning, bait casting, but then thought it'd just be equal equipment.
Yeah, not everyone can do all those.
Spinning rod. No, you can take your pick.
Oh, you can
it's
take
an
your
accuracy
pick.
contest.
Oh, okay.
So you're going to have a spinning rod. It'll be a light action spinning rod with a 3/8 casting plug and a galvanized wash tub.
Nice.
The victor in that will compete in trivia. And you're going to win stuff. It's going to be a great night. All the VIP stuff's all gone, I believe. All the VIP tickets are all gone. So it's going to be a ton of fun. Denver, Colorado on December 6th. Mission Ballroom. Have we done the Mission Ballroom, Yanni?
Not that I know of.
Folly Theater in Kansas City. Capitol Theater in so Kansas City's December 7. Capitol Theater, December 9. That means we need to find something entertaining somewhere between Kansas City and Davenport on December 8.
It's still pheasant season.
Yeah, I was going to say pheasants probably.
Something entertaining.
Does pheasant not account?
Do you know that our most, I don't want to say the name because I don't want everybody to go be talking to her. We have a recent hire here who's from a farm in Iowa.
Oh.
And I said, so what goes on at that farm? Like, shockingly unaware of what goes on out at the farm in terms of hunting. She was surprised. Some guys used to come from far away to hunt turks.
Oh.
But they haven't been there in years. But there's dudes that hunt pheasants out there. But she said her parents said, I don't care if you want to come out.
Wait, who's...
I'm not telling. It's not going to take you too long to figure it out, though.
Yeah, because it's just a quick zip on over to Iowa.
Well, no, they're like, here in the office.
The ranch, the property to hunt.
Oh, well, no, you'd have to talk to her.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I just gave the gender away. You're gonna narrow it down. You're gonna narrow it right down.
Figure this out.
You're gonna narrow this right down. Davenport, Iowa, December 9. Kalamazoo, Michigan, December 10.
Which is dang near sold out too.
Detroit, Michigan. Royal Oak Music Theater, December 11. That's gonna be a fun one. Cleveland, Ohio, Agora Theater, December 13th. Means I'm gonna go visit my mom on December 12th. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Carnegie of Homestead Music Hall, December 14th.
Oh, can we maybe sneak in a little ice fishing, or would that be too early?
That's early.
Depends on the climate, which doesn't. It's not an ice angler's friend these days.
You're a little too far south, I think.
Philadelphia, December 15th. Keswick Theater. Get your tickets and come on out. It'll be a very good time. Okay, gotta do that. Hang tight.
They're going to struggle to find something cool to do in Philadelphia.
Why?
Come on.
There's just not a whole lot going on.
We'll do it on the other. We'll do it on the other direction.
You ever
you
seen
can-
Rocky?
Because Levi Morgan, the world's greatest archer, like categorically the world's best archer,
Mhm.
is joining us for the Pittsburgh show.
That's during Pennsylvania's rifle season, I'll let you know.
Yeah, but he's a big bow hunter, so maybe we can squirrel hunt his place.
Squirrel won't be open because it's rifle season.
What?
Nope. Small
Yeah.
game's not open in Pennsylvania during
Pennsylvania needs a new.
I'm just letting you know. It's not don't yell at me.
How could Pennsylvania justify their horrible, improving but horrible history on Sunday hunting, and then you can't hunt squirrels during deer season?
Dude, there's a lot of hunters in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I think it's just the amount of hunters on game lands and public land at that point in time. Just like people also out there squirrel hunting. It muddies the waters, I think.
Then
That's
it
scary.
opens back up after Christmas.
Yeah.
We get stories now and then of bow hunters who will have the audacity to come and accost. Might be a strong word. Does that imply something physical happened?
No, it could be a
accost
verbal.
someone.
You say verbally accost.
To verbally accost. I should look that up real quick.
No. I'm with Brody. I'm 100% sure that you can just It does not have to be physical.
Verbally,
But I will look it
to
up.
verbally accost. Is it accost?
Mm-hmm.
Verbally accost squirrel hunters
Yeah, I've heard of
as
that.
though they're right and they have a greater right to be in the woods.
Sure.
And this Philadelphia or Pennsylvania deal lends credence to that.
No. Pennsylvania's got a real short rifle season.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 2 weeks.
No,
Anyways.
not even.
Okay, who's smarter than me and can tell me how to spell accost?
ACCOST.
To approach and speak to someone in an often challenging or aggressive way is what Merriam says.
Steve
Jeez,
does that
that
a
was
lot.
dead nuts.
Steve accosts people a lot.
Oh, sure. But not squirrel hunters. Man, they should. That's a great definition
It is.
because it conforms to what I thought it was, which makes it good. The MeatEater calendar, this year's calendar is out. It's called the Dirty Dozen. Go and check that out. We put a lot of work into that calendar. Not as much as normal, but a lot.
Yeah, it's nice to change it up too.
We'll go back to the old style next year. But like I said,
Yeah.
this year's Dirty Dozen is 12 months. So there's 12 seasons of MeatEater. It's 12 months in a year. Each month is a season. And guess what we did? January is the first season.
A lot of Seth's pictures in there.
A lot of Seth Morris photography in there. Check that out. The trivia board game is out. The only board game where conservation always wins. $1 from every board game sold goes to conservation organizations. It's a great trivia board game. It's meant to be highly mobile. We kicked around different things with stupid boards and whatnot, but it's just the same setup we have. It comes with hundreds of question cards. It comes with little mini dry erase boards, dry erase markers. It's travel friendly. It's a great gift. I have had, and we still have one at our fish shack, I have owned over the years the stupidest, worst outdoor trivia games where the makers wouldn't understand the difference between objectivity and subjectivity in questions. Meaning a question would be like, what's the best deer cartridge? That's not trivia. That's
Right.
that's an opinion game. Which, if there was a way to have an opinion game, I would be all in.
Well, there's an opinion game on cartridges on the website, right?
But
now.
everybody knows it's a 308 win.
Yeah.
I'll give this to Janis.
I think that we're gonna see a lot. People should send us pictures of playing the new board game at deer camp.
Well, I was just going to ask if there's any prototypes around that we could take on the youth hunt.
There are. I got one. I
gave one away. I gave one away
Steve gave one away to a
ago.
random bystander.
I gave one away to a random person. I said, "Don't show anybody that." Like no one that works here, because they'll get mad that I gave it to you.
It'd be fun with the kids.
And then the guy promptly runs and shows everybody, and then 5 people go, "Did you give one of the board games away to like some guy out in the parking lot?" Okay.
And you were like, describe some guy. Be more specific.
Did you know Brody? I met a Brody last night that beat your butt. Bad.
I don't doubt it. He probably outweighed me by 150 pounds.
More than that.
No, he was 250. He said
so 100.
Last night we went down and we cooked dinner for the local football team, the MSU Bobcats. That was fun.
250 hot dogs.
Yeah, a lot of hot dogs, a lot of wild, 36 gallons of wild game chili.
Enough for a quart each.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Big gulp of chili each.
What?
Yeah, they could have each had a big gulp of chili.
Is a good reminder is they're kids.
Oh,
but
huge
the
children.
The disparity, right? Between like you're talking to one kid who just happens to be built like a livestock animal.
No, cow.
Peach
I don't know
fuzz.
if that's proper.
Peach fuzz, kind of like some acne and stuff going on. He's playing right next to a person who looks like he's been like supporting a family of 4 for a decade already, right? Like, and that's just what's so odd to me about that stage of athletics.
Yeah.
Is like, here's somebody who's very physically gifted and it will continue to change dramatically.
Oh, in this time.
Yeah. Right?
No, they're still like,
and they're
like developing.
And they're still playing at a very highly competitive level. And then right next to him, you're like, oh no, that is a fully developed human.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and Bobcats are one of the best Division I AA teams in the country.
I was impressed by the poise and politeness.
Yeah.
And I'll point out,
I think that coach,
he runs a tight
coaches
ship.
them well.
You think he disciplines on that level?
Yeah.
I don't mean talked about him like the little kids, but like just like very like just poised. And
I got the impression they had a
nice
lot of
guys.
respect for their coach. And
That could be.
You know.
And each other. I mean, they were all real. I was kind of mixing it up back in there, and they all seemed to be real nice to each other too, and not like real cliquish, which was real impressive to me.
I was the only one that won. We each had, me and Yanni and Cal each had to do a compete in a physical feat. And not surprisingly, not surprisingly, I was the only one that was able to best my opponent.
Did you compete against?
I have a lot of respect.
The water guy or something?
I'm not going to acknowledge Steve at all here.
Ask some details.
But I have a lot of respect for Janis's physical capabilities. But when the kid stood up to go against Janis, it was just very clear that it was not going to.
That was a dude named Brody. This guy floats.
Yeah.
Floats through the air.
The vertical jump was unbelievable.
But yeah, I would expect that from like a skinnier wide receiver type, where you're like, oh, you might have played basketball too. But this dude was a defensive end,
floats.
Our height, our 250 pounds. And yeah, like my jump to get on that box has a lot to do with how high I can get my feet up. Right? Like I got to get up in the air and then just lift my feet up and get him up there.
He would land in the same posture that he took off in.
Exactly. When he would jump, there's like the jump, and then you actually watch the actual part of, I guess, the vertical propulsion.
Yeah,
where,
the lift
where you're like, oh,
continues.
he's just floated 6 inches.
And what's funny too is even like, I'm not dogging on you because you did good. But when you maxed out, he was still like coming down on the mat.
Oh,
he was approaching the mat he was approaching the platform from above, like as though dropped.
Yeah, he had an easy 6 to 10 inches to go until he was going to max. And it was funny because everybody wanted to push him to the max, but the coach is like, nah, we don't need to get anybody injured today. This is fun and all.
That was neat though.
What I did for my tournament is I did a lot of pre-research. And I asked around, what position is least likely to be able to do a lot of pull-ups? And I kept getting the same answer.
punter.
Kicker.
Center.
No, like
nose
the,
tackle.
like the guys that
Oh, I
protect
got
the
you,
quarterback.
Yeah, it's gonna be offensive line or defensive
Yeah,
line.
and everybody said I would
Inside.
talk to the guys that are the 300 plus guys.
Mm-hmm.
So I took on
And-
one of them in pull-ups.
And honestly, you only bested him by one. And I was surprised. I mean, that kid put up almost 10 pull-ups with I mean, think about it. You only got to pull up 140 pounds. He's pulling up 300 pounds.
Yeah,
But
I did best him.
it was
And
impressive.
he used a different grip. I noticed. I did the traditional. He did the I don't know what you
I
call
think it's
that.
because he had so much bulk in his arms and shoulders, he was pretty limited to where he could grab the bar, Steve.
I don't know. I wonder if I could do more or less with that grip.
Well, so it probably averages out. His
he did
extra weight
he did like shooting like he was shooting pistols, shooting 2 pistols.
straight up
Just
in
for
the air.
listeners at home.
Yeah, which is the thing we do a lot. Is 2 pistols straight up in the sky.
I start my morning.
Okay, got to hand it over to Brody for a news flash. This is Brody's
Oh,
favorite subject.
Back to Colorado.
Brody's favorite subject. His favorite 2 subjects come together:
Yep.
Colorado and wolves.
Yep.
Oh, I'm weighing.
We
I'm
touched-
weighing in.
Well, on the second one,
No,
or on the wolves.
I don't know. We got to like.
It's
I
a
talked to a game
Either
warden
way,
for an hour
we touched on
yesterday.
this a
It's
while
Colorado.
ago.
It's a Colorado twofer.
Colorado, a couple years ago or whenever, had a ballot initiative to reintroduce wolves. It passed, and the governor of Colorado kind of mandated that they would have wolves on the ground in Colorado by December of 23.
Now you're aware that it's Colorado.
It's Colorado.
Rocky Mountain High,
So
Colorado.
a month from when this podcast airs, there were supposed to have been wolves on the ground in Colorado. The problem is they can't get wolves anywhere.
Can we introduce the other wrinkle? That there are wolves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Not only are there wolves, but there's wolves that are reproducing within the state of Colorado, which is
Colorado
a distinction
one-
of it.
Yeah,
Not,
but
that's not true. That's not certain.
well, some of them got killed because they were wandering back and forth from Colorado to Wyoming.
Got killed in Wyoming.
Yeah, as soon as they crossed the border, kapow.
Mm. By Coloradans with out of state.
I don't know. But yeah, there are wolves that made their way in naturally, but it doesn't matter. They're still going to reintroduce them, but they just don't have any. Montana, Wyoming, Idaho were all like a hard no. They're like, we're not going to help you put more wolves on the ground
Because of what?
I mean, it could be a political thing, like demographically, politically, those 3 states are much different from Colorado's
But
administration.
Wyoming saying no and Oregon saying no feel very different to me.
Sure, I like the Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. Like, I think are just like we're just not interested in help.
Not participating.
Yes, Oregon hasn't really given a reason why. Washington is like, man, we're kind of interested, but it's just not the right time because the best time to trap wolves is later in the winter.
Mhm.
So if we're going to help you, you're not getting these wolves until later, and then you'll have to introduce them in your state later.
Got
Right now, it's not looking great. Like, there's no way they're going to get them on the ground in a month.
Let me
right?
crystal ball this for you. This is not an issue.
What do you mean it's not an issue?
Them not getting wolves is not like actually a long-term problem.
No, they'll get
I don't
them.
know what I'm talking about. I just know.
I think they'll get them from
Yeah.
Washington
Yeah.
eventually. But it's just not going to happen on the timeline they wanted.
It's
it
an
to happen.
interesting wrinkle,
Yeah.
but this is not like this is. I don't.
You
this
don't
is
think it's
actually a thing.
mildly interesting that for months they haven't they're like, we want wolves, and nobody's giving them to them?
It would become more interesting to me if someone from each of these states who made that decision would say why I made that decision.
I
If it
mean,
was
Greg
all the
Lemon from
same-
MFWP just said, we are not interested in participating in this process.
Cause
I don't know. You'll have to infer. I think it's because they don't want to be held responsible for putting more wolves on the ground.
they don't want to
where-
be held
where-
liable. They don't want
Yeah,
to be
it's
held liable
like-
for their wolves.
Like when Colorado's wolf population explodes 5 years from now,
Oh.
and they're like, "Where did these wolves come from?" And they're like, "Why the hell did you give
They're
us
those
wolves?"
super wolves from Montana.
Yeah, and Canada's not even on the. was never even an option.
What about
Why is that?
Minnesota?
Why is Canada not an option?
I don't know. Maybe they don't want those big bad super wolves.
What
Not
about
an option to who?
To Colorado, they haven't even Canada is not playing ball, and Colorado hasn't.
Why
looked
not
at
Minnesota
Canada.
and Wisconsin and Michigan?
Maybe
Different?
because of the
Too far away?
Maybe because of the
different?
type of wolf. Those wolves don't know what elk are, don't know what mountains are. Maybe it's got something to do with that. I don't know.
I feel like they'd figure it out pretty quick.
Here's my take. It's unchanging. I think that all the animals that are from somewhere should be able to be there, but I just think they should be. I just really lean toward state management.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens. Eventually, maybe they will be managed by the state. Okay, guys, we just wanted to give you a quick update since there was a lag time between when this podcast was recorded and when it's going to air. And in that time, it turns out that Colorado found a source for wolves, which is the state of Oregon, which has agreed to supply 10 wolves to Colorado that will then be reintroduced in Colorado. It looks like they're probably in the process right now of capturing those wolves, and then they'll bring them to Colorado, check them for disease, injury, stuff like that, throw a radio collar on them, let them acclimate, and then they're going to plan on reintroducing those wolves around Vail, Aspen, Gunnison. They're not being too specific about the area they're going to release them in, but it's going to happen. And we just wanted to keep you guys updated that there had been a change in what we had just talked about. Moving on.
This one's serious.
This one is serious. It's the reason we're talking about it because it's another kind of ballot box example of wildlife management.
I think this in my mind is more serious than the other issue.
Oh, for sure. It's especially if you're a hunter. The kind of the same group of people that probably may have been involved in getting wolves back in Colorado, or who knows? Maybe that's not correct. Anyway,
It's the people from the Whole Foods parking lot.
yes, and they tend to travel.
That's where these
they travel around the West a lot.
That's where these signatures get collected.
Yes, they travel around the West a lot.
Farmers markets, Whole Foods parking lots.
There's now a proposal. Well, it's not a proposal. It's in the works. They're getting signatures. They're hoping to get enough signatures to get a ban of mountain lion and bobcat hunting. Get that on the ballot in Colorado, and they'll get. I think they need roughly 124,000 signatures.
Yeah,
which is not a problem in Denver.
It's
and
going
Boulder.
on. Listen, it's going to be on. Unless there's some issue, it's going to be on the ballot.
It will be, and Colorado is now the kind of place where people got to pay attention because it could get banned in Colorado.
These ballot initiatives. I mean, ballot initiatives cut both ways, right? Right to hunt and fish stuff.
Sure.
I don't know if one of those. Yeah, those have come to ballot initiatives, and ballot initiatives don't always win. When they try to do a ballot initiative, what it is basically it's special interest groups, and I don't even mean that in a negative way, because you have special interest groups on both sides. A special interest group will want to bypass the normal channels of lawmaking, in this case, bypass how wildlife gets normally managed.
Often probably because they've already tried numerous
yeah.
times to go through the legislative process, and it hasn't worked.
And they go, well, I'm going to take it to the voters.
Yep.
And then in order to get it on the ballot, it has to enjoy a certain level of popular support. So you write a really cockeyed, because you can't write the ballot cockeyed, but you can write the petition cockeyed.
Sure.
So you write a cockeyed petition
with all kinds of trigger words and stuff like that.
Signs.
Or in a case like this, it's just going to be two fuzzy, slightly spotted,
kittens,
doughy-eyed mountain lion kittens.
Yeah.
Sure.
Saying,
"Oh,
do you
no!
think people can kill me? Should be able to kill me?"
They've gone. So are you going to go as far as to say what how they're actually
the trophy hunting aspect?
And then the animals that are included under this trophy hunting ban.
You can go ahead.
Well, they've listed they're going to try to ban all trophy hunting. And then what they're doing with their messaging is they're defining what trophy hunting is.
Okay.
By saying that it's mountain lions, bobcats, and lynx.
They
can't hunt lynx anyways.
Exactly. It's a federally protected species, right? But again, like what you're saying is in this initial messaging, the petition, the propaganda, you don't have to talk in facts.
Yeah, they did the same
truths.
thing in Arizona with jaguars. Like they added jaguars onto the list.
Yeah, because it tricks people.
Yeah.
That way, some dude going in there to get his his hamburger at Whole
Wasabi
Foods,
peas.
his wasabi peas and his hamburger at Whole Foods. I imagine you probably get a lot of, what's the place that does like the old timey posters and they sell a lot of junk food? Trader Joe's. You probably get a lot of signatures outside of Trader Joe's.
Yeah.
So, anyways, you go in there and someone's like, "Oh my, goodness, good Lord, they're gonna hunt jaguars."
Right.
I better sign this petition, not knowing that that's an impossibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the trophy huntings are saying, well, you're only out there killing it for its hide or for its head or for this trophy, so you can get
What about cash money?
I don't know if that's in the wording,
Mm-hmm.
but again, that's illegal. Like in the state of Colorado, that meat has to be processed for human consumption.
On what?
On a mountain lion.
Okay,
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like,
Colorado.
They got a salvage requirement on lion.
I don't think on bobcats, but lions for sure.
I like that.
Um,
I like those. I like those rules.
but
man.
yeah, Colorado like has a history of this, like going back to the 90s.
That's how they lost trapping.
trapping, leg hold, and kill traps.
Spring bear was 94.
Spring bear, hound bear, and that was 30
Bait.
years ago. Like the demographics in that state have changed a lot in 30 years. So, it doesn't take a whole lot of voters in Denver and Boulder and Fort Collins to kind of skew how the vote goes statewide, Like if if this was proposed in Wyoming, it'd be dead on arrival.
I remember
right?
someone with the trapping thing. I remember someone saying the minute the population of the greater Denver area surpassed the population of the state, trapping was gone.
Yeah. I that wouldn't surprise me.
City slickers.
Yep. So they're back at it again in Colorado.
But you guys can beat, if you're in Colorado, you can beat this. They beat it in Maine. They beat the bear ban in Maine. In Montana, we soundly beated a public land trapping ban on the ballot, 70-some%.
The same thing in Arizona got beat.
Yeah.
Within the last couple of years.
But in the end, when in the future, in 100 years, when hunting is largely done in California, not even 100 years, 25 years, when hunting is done in California, done in Washington, done in Colorado, it'll be because of ballots.
Mm-hmm.
And then it'll be like a different land. It'll be a completely different vigilante landscape out there.
Can we?
I don't want to talk about this with the game warden. Here.
Can we talk a little bit about like what we can do about this?
Yeah, but can I first tell you? Well, yeah, you talk about that. Then I want to talk about a correlation I found with the. I'm just gonna throw this out there. I have found
It's your podcast. Go ahead.
there's a correlation between a state's readiness to embrace legal weed.
Here we go.
We already discussed this yesterday and
But that
shut
was a
you
tribute
down.
show. A state's readiness to embrace legal weed and its readiness to ban hunting practices.
It's just not true. We need
There
to.
is
We
a
need to.
very strong correlation.
We need to actually.
West of the Mississippi,
You know that weed's legal in Montana, right?
but it was slow to embrace it.
Yeah. Not I
A
mean,
state that's-
slower,
A
but not
state
that
that's
slow.
quick and
Grasping.
ready. No,
Steve, you've
you
spent
know why
time
it is?
You've spent time in Alaska, right?
That's what I told him
That's different
yesterday.
though. That's
Because that's where I grew up, and my parents had a greenhouse for vegetables, and they had a greenhouse for other herbal
and he was a
supplements.
trapper.
Very
We're gonna-
conservative.
We're going to get a list of the states and make a real comparison.
You know,
I
I've
bet
been
you
wrong
one of-
about a lot of this kind of stuff.
One of Spencer's statistics people that help him out with the stats for the trivia. Well, I'm hoping right now they're already working on this to come back and make and either show you correlation.
Yeah. You
or
want to know
not.
2 things I was wrong about that I was convinced I was right about? I was wrong.
Only
that-
two?
So I thought that conservatives were less likely to believe in ghosts. In fact, they're more likely to believe in ghosts.
Yep.
I thought that conservatives were less likely to have gluten intolerance, but in fact, it's like a statistical wash.
That one is strange to me. The gluten thing. Real strange.
And I think that people, because here's my theory. Hunters don't mind hiding in the bushes. It's a big part of hunting.
It is.
So they don't mind sneaking off in the bushes to indulge.
Moving on.
Go on, Janis. It's a half-baked idea.
Half-baked. You ever see that movie?
The what you can do part is the takeaway here, gang.
Oh, yeah.
So
Phil,
pay attention.
Probably cut all that out because the more I think about it, I might not be right.
Okay. Looking out for you.
And this there's a lot to be said here, but I think if it's left only up to the people that participate in hound hunting in Colorado, it's a lost battle now, right? Like everybody's going to have to chip in. And to me, I think the best way that we can do it is you can't shrug off or be flippant in conversations with non-hunters. The same way that the opposition is now swaying that middle 80% that's going to decide this vote in their direction, we have to be out there talking and messaging and talking to people about that it's not trophy hunting and all the good things that are associated with this thing that they're trying to take away, and explain to them about the rules and regulations that go into it. Explain to them that the meat has to be, prepared for human consumption, et cetera, et cetera. And I think if you can, I always tell the story, I've told it multiple times on this podcast, about my aunt who very liberal, very hippie. She chants every morning with her windows open. I mean, she'll rather
big pro pot person. Pot legalization.
She's not a pot smoker, but she would rather escort ants out of her kitchen than stomp on them. Right? She's really like one with all living things. She was not into hunting and not a supporter of hunting, maybe even anti-hunter, until I became of the age and old enough and she knew that I got that far into it, and we would have conversations, and I would explain to her what hunting was to me, how I did it, how I went about it, and that completely flipped her. And I can guarantee you right now, if she's in a room of people and there's someone talking bad about hunting, she will step in and on our behalf speak positively about hunting and say that what that person is saying might not be exactly true, and you might want to look into it farther. And that just comes from having conversations. So
I think you gotta have that same conversation around hound hunting and lions with some hunters too, because there are 100%. Hunters who are like, well, it's not really fair. You see that a lot.
Yep.
And
I remember with the public land trapping thing here, I heard from multiple people who were upland bird hunters,
right,
who were pro trap ban because they thought it was beneficial to them.
Mm-hmm.
And just not seeing the big picture about do you honestly think you're immune from this?
Yeah. If you hunt
using dogs to chase down birds.
Yeah. It's weird.
Yeah. Right.
It's what's that sound familiar to?
Yeah. It's and it's funny because people love dogs most of the time, right? Like everybody loves dogs. But I spoke with a game warden yesterday from Colorado off the record. And he's like, look, even in our agency, there's people that, and they're game wardens, and Adam, you'll be able to speak to this, how it is set up here, but they split it up between, I think, education, research, and law enforcement. Their game wardens do all three there.
Okay.
That's what they have to do. And so what he was saying, he's like, even if you don't think it's ethically or personally, you don't believe that, hunting lions with hounds is the right thing to do, it is a tool in the game management officers or wardens toolbox. And when you take it away, it limits how they can, manage it, right? And I mean, it just compounds because now that they don't have that tool, those animals still have to be managed. They're still going to have to be dealt with. And he's like, what's worse, getting, killed by a person out there hunting, or when you get caught in a live trap and then some person walks up to you and he's like, they're always thrashing around in that live trap right before we have to, put one in their head, or sometimes it's so wild they have to actually dart them first and then euthanize them, which he said, which is a bummer because I can't then donate the meat because the meat is drugged up, right? But it's I think that people are easily swayed here because they think it's going to be better for the animal somehow, but it never is. It's never going to be better for these animals when they can't be hunted and the hunting can't be used as a management.
There's still going to be a bunch of lethal control. More on lions and bobcats, but for sure. The thing I would point out is we're talking about stable, regulated wildlife populations.
And it's definitely true. Agencies use hunting as a management tool. So whether the harvest is trapping or hunting, it's a huge part of the management tool to manage the population, to deal with conflicts and things. And if, as Janis said, if you take that tool away, then that burden usually goes on to the agency. And so you'll see a lot more agency removals if hunting isn't an option.
Now, how do you feel qualified to weigh in on something like that, Adam?
Well, I've been a game warden for a while, a dozen years or so, and in charge of a lot of management decisions in Southwest Montana. So
let's back up to how you got into the biz.
How I got in the business. How far back you want to go?
Born in Fairbanks.
Correct. Born in Fairbanks, Alaska. So, as a kid, scale is different than an adult. And so we lived on what my dad called a homestead outside of Fairbanks, Alaska. No running water, no electricity for a good part of my life. And I felt I was way back in the bush. And we went into town once a week for church, laundry, groceries, maybe the Sizzler or something like that, in town, go out to the restaurant. But since going back there, it's not as far out as I remember.
You remember being way out there, yeah.
I remember.
Well, town might have crept up on it a little bit.
That's
too,
very true.
Yeah.
And the roads in Alaska have varying degrees of reliability or condition. And Dad drove an old 1950s pickup, and I just remember always falling asleep on the way into town and just thinking that town is brutal. But being back up there recently, it's a pretty quick drive into town. I grew up in rural Alaska, in the heart of the state.
Was it something that your dad trapped but didn't eat game or something like
that? He did
do
some trapping. He was huge into furs and just making things out of furs. He just loved doing stuff with his hands and being able to make things from scratch. He definitely viewed that man was here to kind of be the shepherd of wildlife or the shepherd of the natural world and resources. We had fur hats and all sorts of stuff that he'd make, but he was a staunch vegetarian.
That is so wild, man.
Really?
He did not eat meat. Every once in a while he'd eat some wild game that someone brought over and stuff, but he didn't hunt. One of our most common protein sources was a soy-based hot dog called a linkette. I don't know if you've ever seen those.
No.
Most stores have them. It's in the canned food section. I mean, I don't know how we ate them now. I don't really care for them, but as a kid, just absolutely loved them, and that was a common snack or protein source.
Yeah. So did he trap the stuff that he used to make the?
It's a mix. Yeah.
But he never would consume the meat from what he trapped.
Nope, didn't consume any meat. I hated going to restaurants with him because there was always some sort of battle with the server over them not having good vegetarian dish options. Is this my meat or my meal going to be cooked on the same pan that, that guy's getting a steak on? My mom would later tell me stories of her sneaking off to McDonald's in town because she wanted meat, liked to consume meat. She's definitely a person who likes her steak bloody rare. But she was married to my dad with my dad, who was a staunch vegetarian. Hey, there's lots of things I asked my dad on why he believed the things he did, and it never really explained them really well to me, so I can only guess. But he'd eat fish though, but not red meat. Definitely.
Is he
not
still
pork.
So
No, he's not. Yeah,
okay.
Passed away a couple years ago. So, yeah.
So, at what age did you go in the law enforcement direction?
So early 20s. So, mom remarried. She married a a guy who worked on the pipeline up there. My stepdad, who I call my dad, who really had a huge hand in raising me. He's a big game hunter in Alaska. We relocated later on to the Midwest, to Minnesota, in my teenage years. And
because of pipeline work or what?
He was up in Alaska for pipeline work. He's from the Midwest, North Dakota, Minnesota, ranching family and such. Moved up there with his brother for pipeline work and such, and then met my mom. They had a couple kids, my brothers, who are half brothers, but I call them my brothers, and they decided to move closer to his family, moved to the Midwest. So I went to high school in Minnesota, went to college there too. Really struggling with what I wanted to do for a profession. I think my two dreams as a kid was either to get paid to snowmobile or get paid to play with Legos. I think those were the two things that I just always dreamed of doing as a kid. And came out to Bozeman, or West Yellowstone actually, for a snowmobile vacation with my dad and grandpa and a few other friends in high school. And I remember seeing a snowmobile drive by that said law enforcement on it. And that was like, holy crap, I could get paid to snowmobile, And so I started thinking about it, but it took me a while to achieve that goal. Went to college, struggled, changed majors multiple times. My first semester at MSU, I think I had a 0.75 GPA because I was skiing and fishing too much and just doing other things than
That's
going
pretty
to
bad,
class.
right? That's like less than a D.
I think that was a W, D, and an F, maybe.
That's hard to recover from. You want to start good, and then it's harder to knock it down.
Yeah. Like I said, changed majors a bunch, and eventually I took a justice studies class in college, and I got an A. I went to class, I was engaged, I got an A. And I thought, maybe there's something to this. Maybe that because I'm into this, subject, maybe this is a good profession for me. And that's some advice I give everybody who's struggling with what to pursue as a career. I spent yesterday at MSU talking to a lot of prospective students and such, and just start exploring different subjects. And when you find one, all of a sudden that becomes easy. You don't make excuses on whether or not you're going to class. You retain the information without studying too hard. Maybe that's a subject for you to pursue. And for me, criminal justice was the first one. I never finished college early on, just got frustrated. I was living in Minneapolis at the time, going to school there at the University of Minnesota, really struggling with living in St. Paul, Minneapolis, and just being in a big city. And one day I just kind of sat down and said to myself, if I could go anywhere and do anything, what would I do? And it was move back to Montana, where the outdoor stuff that I really loved was. So I wrote myself a written contract because I toyed with going into the military too for direction. I wrote myself a written contract that said you'll move to Montana, you'll get a job in law enforcement within 2 years, or you'll join the Marines. And I pinned that up on the wall, and that was my plan.
And you signed it, witnessed it.
Oh, yeah. So moved to Montana. The first law enforcement job I got was in a detention center. So worked as a detention officer there for just under a year.
Oh, was that tough, man?
It was different, pretty eye-opening to societal problems and just people in general. A wide variety of people that get arrested, people who make mistakes and people who have bad intentions. So I was young, I was 21 years old, pretty green to the world and experience. It was eye-opening, but it did further my interest in law enforcement. So a year into that, I got hired with a municipal police department, worked there for 7 years, did all sorts of things from drug task force work to traffic unit.
That was in state.
That was,
Yeah.
Yep. That was here in Montana. And then just a couple things started piling on. I never finished college, wanted to finish that, didn't have a job where I got paid to snowmobile like I originally thought. Conservation was still real important to me. And I just, city life was good, but I really wanted to just be outside. And, so went back to school. I was married then. Both my wife and I went back to school together. She carried me through calculus and a couple other classes. She's definitely got the brains of the two of us. And then started working some conservation jobs while in college. So I worked for the U.S. Fish Wildlife Service, doing upland game bird and waterfowl restoration work.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, in the Midwest in Minnesota, because we'd moved back to Minnesota to go back to school, mostly because we had kids and my parents were there and said they'd help if we want to go back to school. So it was nice to have that safety net. And then I worked as a wetland specialist for the NRCS, delineating and classifying wetlands in South Dakota, and just kept wanting to get back to Montana.
That had to have been a semi-contentious gig, right?
It was, so, the wetland job you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, when you got to go out and break the news.
Definitely.
To someone who's like, well, I'm going to drain all this.
That's exactly was my role. So you had agriculture producers at a time when corn and soybean prices were really high.
Yeah.
But it was also wet. And so they're looking at putting more acreage into production.
So they want to tile everything.
Yep, tile, drain. And so there's a application process, a regulatory process. And so myself and others would go out and we'd classify the wetlands by looking at historical data, aerial photography. We'd determine the hydrology, the soil type. We would
the vegetation regime too, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
catalog the hydrophobic and hydrophilic plants, the invertebrates. And then there's a whole process that kind of taking all those circumstances into it gives you a determination of what kind of wetland it is. And then whatever rules or what they may be allowed to do with it, drain it, tile it, or maybe leave it alone. They can't touch it. So.
I was on a property recently and that work had just been done.
Yeah.
And I was surprised how like gnat's ass it was. Mm. I mean, they had things size of this table.
Mm-hmm.
like contours, not individuals, but the contour of the wetland was very precise.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we use Trimbles and ArcGIS to go out there by hand when we do the inspection. And then,
because you want to get like a cross-section strata layer, and then you can see like how long this has been a wetland and the changes that it's gone through. And
well, I imagine people want to argue about it too. They're going to be like, shit.
Right.
When
that
I was
popped
a kid,
up yesterday.
When I was a kid, that was dry as a desert.
Well, and that's why the historical stuff came into effect. You go back through decades of aerial photography.
Oh, really?
And compare that to weather data to see, in wet years, if it was wet, if it was still wet and dry years and such like that.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
It was a really interesting job. Really loved it. And then,
am I overblowing the contentious aspect of it, or was it more cooperative?
It was more cooperative for sure. Yeah. I mean, there was definitely instances where disagreements occurred. Where a producer might challenge the determination. Sometimes it got overturned, sometimes it didn't. But it was a collaborative effort between us and the producer.
We hunted on it. We had a hunting permission in Michigan's Upper Peninsula on a guy's place. And man, he got in a bunch of trouble for draining something he wasn't supposed to drain once. Mm-hmm. And his name was Herb. And for some reason, we always called him Herbicide. But it wasn't even herbicide. He just drained it.
Yeah. Well, and so that job led to the job I have now. So I started to miss law enforcement. You guys were talking about the respectful, tight-knit group of the football team you were interacting with last night. I missed that brotherhood that law enforcement had, that group of people who were literally willing to sacrifice themselves for each other, and experience a lot of stress together. And when you experience stress together, you build bonds. You guys probably have experienced it out in the field. If a hunt goes perfectly correct, it's fun, but the ones that are really memorable are the ones that go to crap, basically, and you persevere and you get through it. I miss that bond, miss that group of people, miss the law enforcement asset of public service, but wanted to stay in conservation and came out to Montana and became a game warden here.
Is that pretty competitive at the time?
It is. It still is. Yeah. We definitely get a decent amount of applicants, but we have vacancies every year, so we're always hiring. From what I've seen, people stay longer in this profession than maybe some other law enforcement professions. So,
does the flow normally go that people are in police work and go into game warden, or is it like a two-way door, or both?
I've seen it go both ways.
Have you? Like
Yeah.
guys will go from game warden and be like, man, I'm just going back into straight up like highway patrol or whatever.
Yeah, part of law enforcement is it's really hard to understand what it is until you're in it.
Uh-huh.
And you know, another piece of advice I give for people trying to figure out their career, and they come to me and say, "I want to be a game warden." I tell them, "Well, get a degree in whatever your second choice is. Get a degree in don't get a degree in criminal justice. You know, maybe get a degree in wildlife management. You're really interested in conservation. That way, if the law enforcement side doesn't work out for you, you have a backup plan, and you're not, now I have to go back to school." Because you don't know if it's a good fit for you until you try it. And so we have a decent amount of people who wash out of training programs, and we have a lot of people who just decide, I just don't like this. I don't like being a referee for people's recreation and fun out there, and they decide to go into something else.
That's interesting. Is that how a lot of people see it, or is that Adam Pankratz original, a referee for other people's
me.
recreation?
You know, my kids play a lot of high school sports, and I have a lot of empathy for the referees out there, because I see connections for what they do. To me, you're in the public eye, you're correcting people's fun, and sometimes the correction and message you have and rules you're delivering.
You're a buzz killer.
Exactly, you know. So I have a lot of empathy for them, and I've asked a lot of people who come to me who know sports, like, have you ever looked at a referee and thought that looks like a cool job? If they say no, maybe my job isn't the right one for you. It depends, you know. That's not all we do, but it's a part, and you have to have that ability to be able to go into a group of people at a fishing access site and tell them what you're doing is illegal. You have to stop. And you might get, stop being a buzz killer, you know, you're ruining our fun. But the rules are there for a reason, for safety or for conservation and protection of habitat. So
this is a tricky one. This is going to be tricky for you to answer. You don't need to spend too much time on it. But we got a ton of things I want to ask you about. There has to be, how do you handle when there's there's certain rules I imagine that just like seem so concrete. And if that rule wasn't in place, the whole system would collapse. Okay. But there's got to be other rules where you might look and be like, yeah, you know, it is confusing.
Sure.
And you don't need to say which ones, or it is poorly written, or I really can't articulate to you the why this is that way.
Yeah.
Is it hard to jump into that mindset of having it be that I'm not like an arbiter. I'm not here to do value judgments. I'm here to be like, this is my code.
Sure.
And I enforce this code, and it's not I don't need to morally wrestle with, you know.
Yeah.
What I'm up against here.
No, I know what you're talking about. I mean, there's rules that are pretty black and white. I mean, anybody who's grown up around fishing knows you have to have a fishing license.
Yep.
It's just a general rule. It doesn't matter what state you go to. And so I have little patience for people's excuse of, I didn't know I needed a fishing license. It's just nowhere in the United States that you don't need a fishing license. Obviously, there's age groups or groups that maybe don't need them, from the elderly to the young, but everyone needs a fishing license. And so the excuse of, I didn't know, doesn't hold weight with me. And there's a general acceptance of ignorance of the law is not a defense.
Yeah.
But you know, as we create laws and regulations, sometimes we don't know the effects of them until we try and implement them.
Got it.
And our job in enforcement is to implement and enforce the laws. You know, you have your three branches of government. Legislature creates law. The courts interpret them, and the executive branch, which we're part of, enforces them or implements them. So that implementation, you know, you'll have decision makers up on high that'll give us a law or give us priorities, and we'll implement them. But part of my role as an administrator is to send up feedback back up the chain of how that implementation went, how the enforcement went, were there issues? Were we running into problems in the courts where the courts are interpreting it different than the maybe legislative intent? And so sometimes we use that implementation to clarify laws. That's why you may see laws change over time.
Oh, because you just keep running into trouble every time you go to prosecute. Someone tries to prosecute it and they run into trouble.
A loophole is found, or it's ambiguous. You know, if we run into issues where the general public just is confused, or our own staff, you know, that's a good feedback. If our own staff, game wardens, are confused what the rule is in this, that's a good sign the public is too. And we'll try and fix that, you know, as soon as we can. Sometimes the government process is slow. But we have a lot of other tools in enforcement. Ticket is the last thing we want to do, or take someone to jail. Officers have discretion, and the way we look at discretion is what kind of action do we need to take to change behavior. If me just walking up to you and reminding you, hey, put your dog on a leash in a state park is good enough, and you do it and you comply and we never have to talk again, then there's no reason for a ticket. But if I tell you that and then you give me the finger and walk off and start, playing catch with your dog, now we're going to have to step up to a higher level of enforcement.
Yeah.
And most people are compliant. Most people, all it takes is the game warden driving by, and everybody's like, "Oh, game warden's on."
Hey, turn the
on the
radio
water,
down,
exactly. And now everybody's behaving, and so a lot of our efforts are just being out there, interacting with people, and being present. And for the most part, people don't need rules and laws because they're good. They're good members of society, and they want to do the right thing.
You get in the time I've known you, you get, I don't want to say wrangled into, it's just part of your job. You get involved in animal attacks.
Yeah.
And here, because of the nature where you are, you get involved in like serious animal attacks.
Get involved from a law enforcement point of view, not like you step out of the office and.
Now that you're getting attacked by animals. But when there's an animal attack, it's under your purview.
Sure. I've been charged by a few things, but I've never been injured by an animal yet. But yeah, so, wildlife, human attacks, every state has some sort of process or role to play in that when it comes to wildlife management. And in Montana, say a grizzly bear gets into a conflict and causes an injury or death of a human. Local law enforcement is there and responsible too. So the local sheriff's department, maybe the land management agency. So we have a lot of federal lands in Montana. So Forest Service.
Well, I want to back this up so people understand it. So let's say that a hunter on national forest land in the state of Montana gets killed by a grizzly bear.
Correct.
Walk through how that pie is divided up.
Yeah, it's...
there's a lot going on.
There is. There's a lot of agencies with a lot of responsibility. So for one, the most important thing for us is human safety, public safety. So when there is an incident like that, we're going to respond with an effort to stop whatever danger is happening and make sure no one, anybody injured gets the medical attention they need, and then to stop any further public safety issue. That's the priority of everybody. It doesn't matter what jurisdiction, what patch you're wearing on your shoulders. That's the first priority, is to stop whatever bad thing is happening.
In this case, meaning like assess whether this is
correct
going to happen like a second time someone walks into this area.
Yep, exactly. So that could be closing an area until we figure out what happens. So it could be a management action on the animal, all those type of things. And so the jurisdictions, if it happened on U.S. Forest Service land, their law enforcement division has jurisdiction over their property, rules and regulations. The state of Montana has jurisdiction over wild animals in Montana. Grizzly bears, there's some nuance because they're federally protected. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service still has general management authority, but there's an MOU signed between them and Fish, Wildlife, and Parks where we do a lot of on-the-ground stuff. But the overarching
What's MOU
management,
mean?
Memorandum of Understanding or Memorandum of Agreement, MOA.
So they basically sign off managing that situation to you. They're not like, wait till we get there.
Yeah, so some overarching decisions would be handled by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Let's say we capture a live grizzly bear that maybe were suspected to be responsible for the incident. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would be heavily involved in the decision making on that.
On what to do with that bear in that barrel.
Exactly.
So like if a bear kills someone, you determine like you need to kill that bear, you have to run that past Fish and Wildlife first.
Correct. Yeah,
you can't make that decision.
It depends on the situation. There could be an instance right on the ground where a person could.
Well, you've had that happen where you went to an attack site and the bear was still hanging out.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So
and then you don't need to like call someone.
No. There's any person which includes law enforcement has the right to defend themselves.
I see.
And there's decision making on the ground that can occur where this animal is still a threat. Its behavior is predatory. or someone's in danger and we have to make a management decision or defend life, right there in that.
That's like you said, like any person, right? You're in a situation then which would be
correct
applicable to anyone.
Correct. Anybody has the right to defend themselves from danger. And then the other big part of the jurisdictional thing is when you have a human that's injured or deceased, the sheriff's department or the coroner has jurisdiction over that investigation, the unintended death of a human or injury to a human. So there's a huge collaborative effort between federal law enforcement, if they're the land manager, or the U.S. Fish Wildlife Service with grizzly bears, Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and then local law enforcement, which sometimes could involve city, county, highway patrol, whoever is basically available. Our role as game wardens in the state of Montana is to investigate that scene and, one, confirm if an animal was present or responsible. So it could be reported as an animal attack, but unless we have a dead grizzly bear right there, in the middle of the attack, we don't know for sure. And so it's looking at DNA evidence, looking at surrounding evidence, looking for caches or bear dens, tracks, injury assessment, all those type of things to determine if an animal is involved, determine species of that animal, and then look at behavior also. Our best interpretation of, was it acting defensively? Was it acting predatorily? Is it diseased or something? It's just acting out of its nature, totally something wrong. And then the next thing is that management decision. What do we need to do for management on the situation of whatever animal's responsible? Do we leave it alone? Do we haze it? Do we capture it? Do we euthanize it? Or, thinking about location. Is it in a remote location or is it right in the middle of town? If the behavior was defensive, it's unlikely it's going to happen again soon. If it's predatory and they've identified humans as a food source, there's a current human threat. Or if the animal's habituated, it's lost its fear of humans, identified humans as a food source, as in garbage and those things, then that's a problem also.
I don't have an opinion on this, meaning I see both sides of it, but it surprises me that you could have a grizzly kill a person and the decision might be made to let the bear walk. Or is that not really the right way of expressing it? There's a lot of factors in that. And like I said, remoteness and behavior are one of them. There's also whether or not we think we can get the right bear.
Yeah, that I imagine is a big issue, right? Like, time has gone by. They move.
In our experience, I don't know what the percentage is, but 90+% of these incidents that we have with predatory animals that attack a human, it's defensive in nature. The animal is scared to death, hits the person in a defensive mode. Just, I don't know what this is. It's a threat to me. I'm going to smack it around and let it know I'm tougher than it. And then it runs for the hills. It's really rare that we go into one of these attack scenes and the bear or whatever it is still there. And so the likelihood that we get the right bear, it's pretty low. We'll do aerial searches. We'll make sure it's gone from the area. We'll do ground searches. Sometimes we use houndsmen. We set traps, all those type of things. It doesn't mean we're going to euthanize it, but we're making sure the bear has moved on.
But rolling through with a helicopter and gunning a bunch of bears down isn't like
no, we don't want to, and we don't. We wouldn't want to euthanize 10 bears trying to get one. That's
I understand.
That's
how like as far as for the amount of months grizzlies are out walking around, whatever, April to December, say, like, is there just a huge? I imagine when September hits, it's just like not many incidents, and then spike, and then it falls off like in November or something.
Definitely the fall seems to be the highest density of attacks. And a lot of that has to do with just hunters being in the field, being in places that there isn't a lot of people,
and fresh meat laying around.
That's part of it too. But, people displace wild animals. So, in our area, go to any trail that is really popular, Lava Lake, Highlight, all those places. Not a whole lot of wildlife around. That's because of the amount of people, mountain bikers, dog walkers, cars, all those things displace animals. And so where do hunters go? They go where the higher density of animals are going to be. Higher density of ungulates means higher density of predators. There's less people displacing them. And what kind of behavior are they displaying? They're not making a lot of noise.
You sneak to the woods and you make a noise like a cow elk.
Exactly.
And you try to keep the wind to your face.
And so, I mean, it just makes sense that you increase that type of human behavior out in the field, you're going to increase the interactions with wildlife. So, you know,
in terms of wildlife, that's the objective.
Well, Bozeman,
you're trying to increase the interactions with wildlife. Yeah.
Bozeman, Montana is prime grizzly bear habitat, but how many grizzly bear attacks do we have on Main Street in Bozeman? None, because of the high density of humans that are displacing grizzly bears. They just aren't around this area because we get in their way. They're afraid of us in a way, and it's just not a good place for them to be.
And even if they did want to be, the likelihood that they're going to get in trouble and die from getting hit by a car, from getting in trouble, from getting into garbage, whatever. It's like, even if they wanted to be, it's still tough for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we have some that, I don't know if they live full time, but they certainly skirt with town boundaries, right?
Sure. And particularly as this town grows, you know, that urban to wildlands interface grows or gets more complicated.
Yeah, dude, there's a house. It's like they backpack the parts. That house that you can see from anywhere in town, halfway up the Bridgers.
Yeah.
The hell is that?
Is that the one that reflects the sun off?
Oh, no. He's like, man, he said to his realtor, like, I want you to find the most conspicuous spot you can find in all of town.
Yeah.
Then I'd like you to find the most conspicuous material. And I want you to backpack all that material up to that spot.
Helicopter.
So I can build a radar station.
And the builder's like, now you're going to be looking at a lot of people and you're going to have a good view of the airfield. Is that all right?
Like, what is that
Perfect.
thing?
Sure.
Is it a house?
We're in Three Forks and the sun's hitting something.
Oh yeah, no,
something right.
I know what you're talking about. It's
You're
blinding.
like, there's something halfway up the Bridgers that's like glowing.
Not a raptor-friendly home.
Man.
Along with people displacing wildlife, there's plenty of folks that are moving into that urban wildlife interface too, that make an effort to attract wildlife.
Sure. You know, wildlife is one of Montana's greatest resources. And so a lot of people visit here and move here because of those wild resources.
I did.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's something
Cal was just regular old born.
Brought me here.
Lazy about it. Just lazy about it.
Yeah, and so I can understand the appeal of the thought of buying a little mountain place and being able to look out your window and see bears and elk frolicking in your yard. And to Janis' point, there's still plenty of wildlife around this town. And the towns that are closer to higher animal density. So think about towns closer to Yellowstone National Park, West Yellowstone, Gardner. They deal with grizzly bears going down Main Street all the time in those towns. Less people, but also they're in the heart of high density wildlife areas. That change that's occurring around here definitely is increasing conflict. As we are seeing more people move into the area, more people displace wildlife, more habitat being developed, and more people moving into that interface zone, you're seeing definitely conflicts on the rise. In those
and more bears.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted
wildlife
to add,
are doing great.
Like, you said you've been a game warden for 12 years, and you hear all the time, like, oh, every year it's more grizzly attacks. Like, do you feel that's the case, or is it just like there's more exposure to the attacks in the media, or is it like actually an increasing number of attacks?
You know, so my understanding from talking to our bear specialists and seeing their data is that the attack rate, if you compare it to population at the same time of the animal and population of humans, it's remaining steady.
Oh,
so the frequency's going up, but so is the bear population and human population. So it's not like it's just spiking crazy as an anomaly.
It's not like bears have changed their habits.
No.
It's just that there's more of them and there's more people for them to attack.
Correct. And why do people move to this area?
Get attacked by a bear.
Well, to go outside, you know? I mean, it's crazy the amount of people that are citizens of this state that either hunt and fish or just recreate, period, out in the woods. I mean, we see it around this area. The explosion is huge. People typically vacation here not for the cultural amenities of the town, which has amazing ones, but it's because they want to see the outdoors and the wild resources we have. So
let's move to otter attacks.
Come on. While we're on,
That's what I want to hear about.
hey, it's going to be good, I promise. But this follow-up question I think is good too. While we're on grizzly bears, there seems to be in our community an attitude every time you see a post about another grizzly bear attack. It's like, it's because we need a goddamn grizzly bear season, and if we start shooting the bears, it'll cure all of our grizzly bear problems. What's your attitude, opinion about that?
You asking me?
Yeah, I mean, Montana has a plan where we would like to retain or take back grizzly bear management.
Mm-hmm. Can I interrupt?
Yeah, go for it.
The feds would like you to do it.
Oh, there's an agreement there for sure.
Well, no, I just want people to. This I'm not speaking as Adam Pankratz. I'm not speaking as Warden Pankratz.
Yep.
This is the point I like to clarify to people all the time. The federal agency that is in charge of taking care of grizzly bears, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they are the ones. They are the ones that propose delisting. This gets lost all the time. Like they say, of all the endangered species they administer, they say when it's time. They have said
multiple times
for 13 years, or they have said, hey, heads up, it's time. It's them saying this. So go on. I just want to make sure that listeners at home understand this isn't someone going and being like, give me that. It's like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has said it is time now for us to hand over management of the grizzly bear.
Yeah, in this,
and then outside litigants block them from doing what they're trying to do. This is not a tug of war, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, go back to. I just make sure people understand this because this is not widely understood.
Well, thinking about Janis' question, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and other state agencies utilize hunting as a management tool. That's real critical to the North American model and to the way that we manage populations here. And so not having that tool for grizzly bears, it's just one less option for us to use. The future is going to be really slow on any grizzly bear, state-managed grizzly bear. You're not going to see wide open general tag hunting on grizzly bears anytime probably in our lifetime.
Anytime in anybody's life. I mean, unless like all of a sudden everybody dies.
That's so
like most people die, maybe.
If a season ever occurred, it's going to be extremely limited. And for those who are saying, we need to put the fear of man back into these bears, that's very unlikely that is going to result from 1, 2, 3 super tags out there. It just isn't,
Can you explain, like, people may not know what super tags are and the fact that if there was a hunting season, there's only ever going to be a few bears that would.
Yeah, more than likely, if the state gains back management, it's going to be limited. Any sort of hunt isn't going to happen right away. And if and when it ever does, it's going to be very limited to a handful of tags, 1 or 2 statewide would be my guess.
Yeah, I'd like to remind people we kind of got a glimpse of how it would go some years ago when delisting came close. Wyoming was going to do 20. They were going to issue 20 tags, and they have the bulk of the way it's cut up. They have the bulk of the bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which was going to get delisted. Had they done the Northern Continental Divide, it might have played out differently. But the way they were looking at delisting the greater Yellowstone area, Idaho was going to do a tag. I think it was 1.
Was it 1? I applied for that because I was a resident. It was only open to residents of the state of Idaho.
Yeah, and Montana abstained. Right?
Montana was going to sit it out.
Yeah.
Wyoming was going to do 20. So 20 in Wyoming, 1 in Idaho, 0. Now, that wasn't Northern Continental. Like, it might have played out differently because Northern Continental Divide, they're the state sitting on over 1,000 there. But just to give you a sense of how limited it was going to be so limited that it was going to be none.
Yeah.
That was just first year.
Yeah.
That was first year. And that was at that time, not this time.
Yeah, the plan, I'm not part of writing the plan. I'll help implement it and such, but it's going to be very limited. The big thing is making sure the state and the citizens of the state have tools to deal with conflict, tools to deal with management decisions. So, grizzly bear populations are expanding. They're moving into areas they occupied a long time ago, but they haven't been for 100+ years. And so towns, landowners, ag producers are dealing with a new conflict they're not used to dealing with. And so what they want is tools. They want answers from the state management agency, from the local bear specialist, from the game warden. What can I do when this animal is in my front yard and I'm just trying to take the kids to school? What can I do when this animal's killing my livestock? All those type of things. How do we respond to it? And the agency's opinion always has been through state management is the best way to achieve those goals, or to be able to have the most amount of tools in the toolbox to deal with those conflicts.
Well, I think, it's very interesting, and I haven't looked at the exact numbers in a while, but if you look at like the black bear population, and we have a black bear season, and the increase year over year of conflict black bears that are killed by not hunters, right? By state or federal employees at one agency or another. That's a very telling trend, a very telling number to me, right? It's like,
meaning here you have spring season, fall season.
You can run them with dogs.
And you still got bears coming through the screen door.
Yep.
It's a primary tool for us. So when our game wardens are responding, or our bear specialists responding to a black bear conflict, for instance, around this area, and it's, out of city limits in an area that hunting is currently open or will be soon or something in the future, and it's safe, that's one of the first options or first solutions they present to the homeowner, landowners. Can we get a bear hunter out here? Because we would much rather a hunter harvest that than we harvest it ourselves. And
for a lot of different reasons, right?
Many different reasons. Yeah, absolutely.
I never get any phone calls about this.
Well, that warden I spoke to yesterday said the absolute worst part of his job, and he believes many of his colleagues feel the same way, is to have to euthanize animals.
Absolutely. The first time I killed an animal on duty, and the first actual time was accidental. So I was doing wetland work over in Minnesota, and I was driving a side-by-side across the prairie to do some restoration work, and I drove over a nesting duck. Just didn't see it there, drove over it, and it upset me so much because here I am out here trying to manage these, save them, whatever you want to call it, and I just drove over one. And it was just this moment for me of and I was with a couple of high school kids on a crew who were working with me, and I had them stand up in the fort side by side, and their job now is to scout for ducks so we don't run over anymore, because it's just totally disheartening for me. And it's the same thing here. When we have to euthanize one, we have a lot of empathy for that animal. We put a lot of effort, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into managing these species, caring for them, ensuring they're here for a long time. The last thing we want to do is kill one. There's times we have to because of the conflict, but usually that conflict's preventable. Usually that conflict has a lot to do with humans. Sometimes it doesn't. There's surprise encounters like we talked about out in the woods where humans and bears, or humans and whatever animal, occupied the same space, and there's a fight over that space. It's really nobody's fault at that point. The bear's defending its space, and maybe you're defending your space. And those conflicts will always be there, but the preventable ones of keeping attractants clean, not having fruiting trees in your yard, not having bird feeders, keeping your trash locked up until just before trash pickup occurs. All those type of things are huge that will prevent a lot of these management removals of species like bears.
Yeah, when I was working with the grizzly team in Idaho, which is like one of the coolest things I've ever done and will probably ever do, to Janis' point, like he had this story about there's a bear getting very familiar with the particular campground. They had gone into the campground, very popular one outside of Island Park, Idaho, and which is part of the GYE, and had gone to every single campsite. Said, hey, there's a grizzly bear. You guys got to keep your trash locked up. This, very sophisticated, established campground with bear-proof containers for storage and then bear-proof garbage cans for disposal. And one particular campsite left all their watermelon out. Very identifiable food. The bear came in, got that, was basically camped out on the edge of the campground. These two folks who are absolute grizzly bear professionals and very invested in grizzly bears. Like, we had to shoot that grizzly bear. And when I took it upon myself to then inform the campers at that campsite that the reason that we had to shoot that grizzly bear was because they couldn't bring it upon themselves to take their watermelon 35 yards to the garbage and put it away, they informed me that we had ruined their family vacation. Right? And this is like, it's the animal, really. I mean, it is the animal in North America. Like, it is the thing that's referenced. It's a species that everybody's in awe of in one way or another. We were just talking back with the football players last night. I was talking with a bunch of them, I was like, there's still a large population of hunters in Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, that they plan their hunts way around grizzly bears. Yeah. They're like, this is a known grizzly bear area. We're not going to attempt to hunt there, fish there, or even apply for tags there.
Good.
And I'm like, but there's plenty of people who don't think that way too. So that's why we were talking about displacing animals. Like, a lot more people recreating in bear territory. But
let's move to otter attacks. So let's say you have an otter attack. And you're like, this isn't going to become a normal problem, but it gets a lot of public attention.
It does, and it's rare, but more common than you think.
Oh, is that right?
In a way, the statistics change every year, but when I look at the reports of human-animal attacks, the top 3 species in Southwest Montana, for just incidents reported to my staff, grizzly bear's number 1.
Okay.
What's number 2?
Black bears.
Black bears. Moose.
Otters.
Moose.
Oh,
Moose is number 2. And typically in most years, otters is number 3.
No,
are you serious?
It doesn't mean there's dozens or hundreds of them, but just on average, there's a handful, a couple every year. Usually we run into around 10 grizzly incidents in this area. Changes every year that causes some sort of human injury or conflict or something like that. A handful, 3-4 moose incidents where a moose stomps on somebody or kicks somebody, and then 1 to 3 otter attacks probably every year.
I know Anchorage has had some real otter conflict. Like, some otters took over a park.
Yeah.
And there was those otters that were taking over that surf break somewhere over on the West Coast.
River otters.
California.
Sea otters, sorry.
Yeah.
So
they're getting up on people's surfboards and
get the hell out of here.
Oh yeah,
man, otter gang violence these days just
so
outrageous.
You did a lot of interviews about the otter.
Oh, that's that thing they said was going to happen.
Yeah.
The test of the emergency alert system.
Of course it happens.
Federal.
Hey, I left my cell phone in the truck knowing it was going to be a distraction in here.
Well, they really did that. I remember reading that being like, that seems like a weird idea.
It works.
Yeah.
That should be the noise when an otter's coming at you.
So there was an otter attack, and it became a national news story.
The last one did, that's the first time I've seen an otter attack for us become national news. Yeah, interviews with the Washington Post, LA Times. I did an interview with Fox News Live and such. It was a pretty severe one.
So what caught hold? Like, why did that grab the national attention the way it did?
I think because of what you were kind of getting at is the perceived rarity of the event, and then the severity of the injuries. And so I have an aunt who believes it's a conspiracy against otters. She believes that we're making up all these otter attacks, because how could such a cute, cuddly animal do such?
She thinks you're trying to villainize the otter.
For sure. And when I send her articles, or a time we post a warning at a fishing access site about an aggressive otter, she just thinks it's all a lie, because there's no way that otters could ever do such a thing.
Well, what do you have to gain from villainizing otters is what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, this is how I would do it. Okay. It is so dangerous that you can't have people floating in inner tubes or doing non-angling activities on rivers.
I like that. I like that.
In fact, they can't use the boat ramps. They can't stand in the middle of the boat ramp while you're trying to back a raft in.
Mm-hmm.
All
He's going to scare everybody away and then have the river all to himself.
Mm-hmm.
So, like we talked about, humans displace wildlife, and we have a section of a river, the Lower Madison here, that has a tuber hatch every summer. When
it's so weird because that was not even sort of a thing.
Word of mouth, companies coming in and catering to it,
big business
all sorts
now.
of stuff.
Like that was. I mean, I always try to tell my kids when I'm driving along.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, this just was not a thing.
But didn't you do that growing up in Michigan?
Oh, that's what I tried to explain to them.
It's big in the East.
So yeah, so I was recently. I just had this conversation with my kids. I'm like, there's certain things that, like, when I moved to Montana in 1996, there were certain things that were not part of the culture. Ice fishing, they were woefully behind in ice fishing technology.
For sure.
From a Midwest perspective, it was like they just don't know about it.
Yeah.
And they did not know about tubing.
Mm-hmm.
Now they do.
Yeah.
They did not know, it had not occurred to Montanans that you would float down a river in a tube. But and where I grew up, you'd skip school to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was baked into the culture. Tubing.
Yep.
And
I
you knew how to
remember.
you could rig your cooler in
You
the
got to
cooler.
realize too
in the
that
tube.
like the rivers, like a lot of the rivers, kind of off limits to tubing, right? You just be doing pinball down whitewater rapids
you
and
like
hitting
drag,
boulders and shit.
you drag your ass down a never-ending
Like the
gravel
Muskegon
bar.
River,
It's deep.
you could tube 10 miles and never hit a rock.
Or the
yeah.
water temperature's really cold, makes it uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Exactly, too. And then where I grew up, I mean, in August, and it's just like being in your bathtub.
Well, the reason I bring it up is high concentration of tubers on that section of the river, which means low density of river otters, which means very few incidents of attacks. And where we see the attacks happen is when tubers decide the Lower Madison's too full and they go to other remote sections of rivers to get away from people, less density of humans, higher chance that they might have an encounter with an otter.
What do you think the otter's deal is?
Again, I think it's very similar to what we talked about before. Human and wildlife trying to occupy the same space.
Is there always pups involved?
There can be, but it could be a food source. It could be, a den. It could be just a territorial attack. But it's humans and wildlife occupying the same space, and the wildlife is saying, "This is my area. Get out of here."
And what moves does an otter use? Like,
Well,
what are they doing when they're,
when they're attacking?
Yeah, like what is their sort of attack pattern?
Well, I've never seen one happen myself. I've only helped clean up the mess afterwards. And thinking of otters they're predators. You know, they got sharp claws, sharp teeth.
I call them
they
the
know how to use them.
wolves of the river.
Oh, absolutely.
Listen, I would never ever. I was like, I believe that you don't want to fight any animal that has no legs.
Well, and think, like a snake,
and like an otter's like, you're not gonna grab it by the leg, that ain't gonna do any good.
Like a
he's still gonna
snake-like
maul.
body.
Yeah, he's like no leg. Holding him by the leg and lifting him up, he's just gonna be like mauling your arm and face.
And
There's
how vulnerable are we in the water? That's not what our
that's
bodies
true.
are
yeah,
designed
someone
to
sitting
be.
in a tube
So,
is not impressive as someone like standing up, walking down the trail,
I mean,
Do you remember when we saw the two sea otters mating in Southeast Alaska?
No.
Were you on that trip?
no.
No. Well, never mind. But if you saw them just doing their thing, you definitely don't want to get in a scrap with them, right? Because they're
just the agility.
Yes.
Oh, we saw like 30 sea otters all together. It's like just thinking about it, it's like if those things want to come over here and tussle, like 30 of them,
You ain't stopping them.
no.
But they're primarily biting.
Correct. So the last one, it just chance encounter. The ladies that were floating down the river weren't doing anything wrong. They're just floating down the river. They occupied the otter space. They from their description, 1 to 2 otters. They're not sure, but the way they were attacking multiple people, it made them think there was more than one otter. Typically, they're attacking the tube itself or legs and buttocks that are suspended in the water when you're in a tube. In this particular incident, one of the females fell off the tube or jumped off the tube, and as she was swimming, the otter came up and attacked her face. Now that her face is down in the water, and that's what caused the severity of the injuries. And
while swimming,
yeah, and she got to the other side of the river. Her 2 friends got to she went to the remote side of the river, while the 2 friends went to the highway side. They called 911. A highway patrolman showed up first. This highway patrolman jumped in the river, swam the length of the river with aggressive otters in the river, and provided first aid to the severely injured gal on the other side while a helicopter was called. And we were the last ones on scene. By the time we got there, deputy sheriffs, the highway patrolman, and EMS staff had kind of taken care of this situation and provided the life-saving attention.
Was there any concern with rabies there?
There can be, depending on the behavior.
Yeah.
There has been incidents where we've attempted to trap and test them. We did not in this one.
I was going to ask, is there an expectation to treat that aggressive river otter like you would an aggressive grizzly bear? And
Sure.
like, I want that trapped. Or
Well, again, it depends on behavior. If it's abnormal behavior, then yes, we're gonna probably take a hands-on management action against it. But if it's normal behavior, which wild animals like otters protecting their territory is normal, we may not. So,
did you guys pull a DNA sample off that otter?
No, we did not on that one.
So you can't even compare them in a lineup later.
there are so many good T-shirt designs going through my head right now.
I already sent an email to Hunter. I'm ahead of you.
Okay, can we move on from otters?
You go for it.
Tell me about when you catch wind that wild game meat has made its way into the commercial market.
Sure.
Walk me through how you see that and how does that happen and what's that wind up looking like?
I think it's important to talk about why that's illegal first,
Okay.
or a little bit about the history. You guys have talked a lot about market hunting and the history of that and what it did to wildlife in North America. I think that's one piece of the puzzle, but it's an important piece. As the West was being settled, agriculture wasn't heavily established in the West. And so you have people coming out here to harvest fur bears and other wild game, for exploration, for settlement as part of the Homestead Act, and also for gold extraction and exploration, all those type of things. And agriculture kind of was a step behind,
Got it.
And so there's a lot of people moving into the area, a lot more people than there was before. Obviously there was indigenous tribes here living in a sustainable manner on the landscape. But as the Western culture moved west, there a food source was needed for all these people, and wildlife was easily identified in the beginning as it was abundant, as a resource. And for different reasons, some of it was harvested through market hunting. Some of it was just subsistence.
Mm-hmm.
Huge amount of subsistence hunting occurred in Montana and other Western states as gold panners and trappers and others were establishing themselves out here, or agriculture was getting established. That led to a severe decimation of wildlife. You're talking by the late 1800s, there was hardly anything left in Montana. Elk herds.
What's an interesting irony is I pointed this out on this project we're working on about commercial hunters, is that the Boone and Crockett Club takes its name from 2 commercial hunters.
Yeah.
But the first order of business for the Boone and Crockett Club was going after the commercial sale of game meat.
Sure.
It's like a weird,
absolutely
sort of conflict built within the name.
I imagine two commercial hunters had a good perspective. I mean, they saw that their industry or livelihood was dying, as just game became more scarce.
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely the story for commercial waterfowl hunters were the ones who were like, do you know that there's no birds left?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they pointed that out?
Right.
Yeah.
But I think also it is a livelihood lifestyle thing too, where it's like, we've been living this life for so long. It's like we got to figure out how to make sure that it sticks around, because I can't imagine, going back to school and getting a desk job after running my punt gun every night for the last 5 years.
You think about the first Western settlers to come to Montana and just the abundance that was here. I, back in college, took a class where we just read the Lewis and Clark journals for a whole semester, every single page. And I was really stuck by a description at Pompey's Pillar, east of Billings on the Yellowstone River, where they described standing on that pillar and seeing the abundance of herds of elk, buffalo, and wolves just surrounded by them as they were looking out on the short grass prairie that surrounded that river valley. You can go and visit that site now. And that day's journal from, I think, July of 1805, 1806, somewhere around there, is etched on Pompey's Pillar. And when you read that and then look around and see the change in the landscape, you're not going to see any elk. You're not going to see any wolves for sure. And you won't see buffalo unless they're ranch buffalo. The landscape dramatically changed quickly in 100 years. And our agency, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and the statutes and rules that govern it, and that also led to this great resurgence of wildlife, were in reaction to basically that loss of wildlife, and set a lot of groundwork for the work that we do now, to include investigating commercial harvest of wildlife and such. A quick history of wildlife law. Late 1860s is when the first kind of wildlife law was enacted in Montana. You had early 1900s, the Lacey Act, the Pittman-Robertson Act, and such. But the history of conservation law and regulation in Montana starts with decimation, then laws created in response, and then enforcement of those laws. So if you think about the history of the agency, it started with one game warden and some fish and game laws. And then slowly more game wardens were added, game wardens who patrolled an area of like 18,000 square miles alone by themselves. But there was no wildlife staff. There was no management. The local university, MSU, didn't start their wildlife management program until the 1930s. So you had this span of 30 years where the way we managed wildlife was just law and enforcement. And then with Aldo Leopold and others, it switched to more of a management, habitat restoration. And through that, all this trial and error, those 7 pillars of tenets of the North American model were developed, not because one person wrote them down like the 10 Commandments, up on high on a piece of slab of stone, but through trial and error, figuring out what worked. And one of those tenets is elimination of unregulated commercial harvest, commercial markets. And why I say unregulated is there's still commercial markets for public resources, right? There's ore and oil extraction that occurs on public lands. There's timber harvest. And there's also a huge fisheries industry in many states that has a commercial aspect to it.
You can sell wild mushrooms. You can sell elk antlers. You can sell coyote hides.
There still is a role for
firewood.
Yeah, exactly.
Firewood.
Exactly. There's all sorts of public resources that still can be extracted commercially and sold commercially. But there's resources that we've identified that can't sustain a commercial market. And large wildlife, ungulates and such, is one of them that it's pretty universal. There's game farms that have developed to meet that demand of people who don't hunt, that do want to eat elk and buffalo and other things that they can't go out and hunt themselves. But for wild resources, that elimination of commercial markets was really key to allowing the restoration to occur. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe we get to a point where hunting participation is so low and wildlife populations are so abundant, you could see commercial markets come back in a certain state. But right now, for where we are, it's just not feasible.
When I've tried to express this to people, like as many deer as we seem to have, but then you try to express the frailty of deer, would be that if every American put a deer in their freezer tomorrow, we'd have a 260 million deer deficit.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not, they're not there.
I think something really important to remember is the Green Revolution in agriculture has helped save wildlife in a way, because we've found other food sources. 150 years ago, when in Montana, the primary food source for protein, at least, was wildlife. With a human population, a tenth or less of what it is now, it wasn't sustainable. We totally wiped it out.
They ate them. Yeah, you're right. They ate them into oblivion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even just having the gold mining towns.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And obviously there's other things. They were harvested for fur and things like that. There was predators killed just because they were viewed as pests. There's lots of other things that occurred from the use of pesticides, the habitat fragmentation, all those type of things, to the extraction of resources and the way it was done that changed habitats and healthy ecosystems. But a huge part of that impact was commercial markets for meat, or just people harvesting meat for food. You think about how poor, particularly the state was back then. People escaping the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, huge sections of drought. Again, agriculture and markets not established. Another thing to think about is transportation. A huge reason why we have cheap food now, or I know food prices have gone up, is huge increased efficiencies in transportation, and how we don't have to grow cabbage in the Gallatin Valley anymore, sweet peas, because we can get it somewhere else where they can grow it more efficiently and it's cheap to ship it to us.
Mm-hmm.
That's changed a huge amount. And if you think about transportation roles back then, how long did it take you to get from Missouri to Bozeman, Montana? A whole season, a whole summer, and probably 3 of your 6-person party died along the way. It's the old Oregon Trail game we all played in grade school. All those things have changed to allow us to now have vibrant populations, sustainable populations that also have an intrinsic value. 150 years ago, very few people probably looked at wildlife as just appreciating that it was there and the beauty of it. It was looked at as a commodity, as something that either could be sold and bartered with, or something that could feed my family and make sure I didn't starve this year. And because we have all these developments in Western society and human culture, from transportation to agriculture, we can now take that item that was only viewed as just value commercially, and now it has value for leisure, or just intrinsic value that exists. We talked about grizzly bear conflicts and such, and every time we remove a species, or not a species, but remove an animal from the population, there's people that disagree with that decision. And a lot of them don't live here. A lot of calls and emails I get are from people from somewhere else that are upset. We killed a grizzly bear, a mountain lion that was in conflict. Those people don't view that animal as a commercial commodity, but they have intrinsic value to it. Mm-hmm. They like the idea that it exists, just to know that this wild animal exists in this wild, amazing place. And that's something new in society that I don't think has really been here for a while. That's really led to a lot of the foundation of where we are and the success of wildlife conservation.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so getting back to commercial markets. So in Montana, as in most states, it's illegal to sell game meat. There are certain parts of animal that you can sell and trade in Montana. Now, the rules are different for every state. In Montana, you could sell the hide, you could sell bones, you could sell antlers, but you can't sell or meat, so commercially. So if you had a restaurant that was advertising, come eat wild game meat, if it's truly wild, it would be illegal.
Is it ever as overt as that?
It depends.
Mm-hmm.
It can be. We've seen some restaurants that have public menus. So if the group of us went in there, they'd give us the menu that's on their website. And then we've seen restaurants that have a private menu.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
we have restaurants that sometimes have contracted with tour companies and such, and they may shut down for the day. Maybe you go there and they're closed, but it's filled with a lot of people. Looks like a private party, and there's a tour bus outside. They may be eating on a different menu. It depends on the restaurant. Every restaurant's different. But we've investigated restaurants.
Is there any chance you'd ever be able to slip me one of those menus? I mean, I just like to see it. Like written down.
Sure.
You've seen it written down.
There's instances.
Give me an example of what you've seen. I just want to know, like, you don't need to the exact word, but give me an example of what you've seen, like actually written down on a menu.
Wild fish is a really popular one.
Okay.
So wild trout. Yep.
It was just wild trout.
Yep.
Local river.
Yep. Exactly. Okay. Exactly. And we have had cases where we have, it's a mix in how we start our investigations on these restaurants. Some of them is somebody sees that menu or is offered it and reports it to us. Some of it's written down, some of it's verbal, but someone gets offered a dish they know or thinks is illegal and they call us. We've also run into instances where we catch people fishing or hunting out there that are attached to a restaurant. They're keeping large amount of over limits. And once we dig into it, they're out there providing food for that restaurant.
Got it. This is a long time ago.
Hypothetically.
Many of the people in the story have since passed away.
A long time ago.
Exactly 7 years.
No, a long time ago, I had a friend that was approached about a bear paw.
Mm-hmm.
And they misunderstood and they thought they wanted, so they went and had an old bear rug and they brought him a claw off an old bear rug. Yeah. And the restaurateur was like, no, that's not what I meant.
That's bear
and
paw.
like, oh my goodness, that's what you mean?
Bear paw soup is popular in a lot of Asian cultures.
Yeah.
Same with dishes or powders or ointments made with gallbladders. Those are probably the two most popular trafficked items for bears. There's also a market for bear meat for sure. And there's legitimate places you can get bear meat. A recent case we had.
There are?
Well, yeah, in some states you can legitimately raise bears. Oh. So one case we had in a local restaurant.
No kidding. Someone's commercially raising bears in the U.S.
As far as I know, I don't remember what state this one was from, but we had a case that was referred to us where a USDA inspector, or it was a Health and Human Services inspector, went to do their inspection of the kitchen and found packaged meat that was labeled bear and reported it to us. And as we digged around, that bear meat had come from a legitimate source, which kind of shocked us at the time too. In other countries, there's definitely markets for it. Bear bile is a huge industry in some other countries, and there are really sickening bear bile farms.
Yeah,
out there.
I read about that. My kids told me about that and showed me a thing about it. Where does it stand right now? This is one of the more confusing things I found in terms of trying to stop the commercial market. Is for a while it was, you'll know this better than me, but for a while it was that if you killed a black bear, so you legally kill a black bear, and you basically you have this like contract where you tag it, it becomes your property. Mm-hmm. It's transferred to your personal possession. But you couldn't possess the gallbladder from the bear. Is that correct?
Not in Montana. So you can possess it, you just can't commercially sell it.
So you haven't heard it I feel like there was some place
could be.
Okay, so you could have your own and do with it what you will.
Correct.
And I could give it to a buddy of mine if he wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You cannot sell it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then
I got a Montana question. It's not about bears. Since rabbits and squirrels aren't game animals, could I set up a rabbit and squirrel taco stand and not be breaking the law?
No, because you got inspection problems.
Yes. So I would not have any regulatory authority over it as
You
Fish,
would
Wildlife,
not.
and Parks, but I imagine there are other agencies that would.
I think that's when it becomes the USDA's big business.
Oh yeah, because they got
or FDA or USDA because it's not because you're selling uninspected meat.
Yep, gotcha.
Good idea though.
Yeah.
What if you do get it inspected?
Will they?
That's
so
true.
So let me tell you this. Years ago, I was going through a fact checking process with a magazine, and I pointed out that it's illegal to sell dog meat in America. And the fact checker's like, show me where that's true. And it wound up being it's only illegal in 2 states. It was illegal at that time. It was illegal to sell dog meat by state law in New York, and it was illegal to sell dog meat in California. So they're like, well, why isn't it for sale everywhere? USDA is not going to inspect it. And state inspectors won't inspect it. And they say that they don't have any sort of like inspection rules on it. So if you wanted to bring it into the supply chain, they don't have what are they even looking for? So if you somehow petitioned the USDA successfully to establish dog inspection criteria, and at that time in 48 states, no one would be breaking a law. And I even looked at this, it'd be like that you could feasibly, if somehow you got it inspected, you could walk into a grocery store and there'd be a pack of ground dog meat. And it's not like actually breaking a law.
And then the next legislative session, it'll be illegal in that state.
That's what in my research about this, the reason it had turned up in New York and California is because it had become an issue.
Yep, exactly.
It had become an issue, and someone had overcome whatever inspection hurdles.
Yeah.
So it might be that you know, and I don't know at what point in production. I don't know what point in industry. I know that I remember 10 years ago when I was invested in this subject, the bison industry was an obstacle to its growth was inspection, right? Like getting their goods inspected for interstate travel, but interstate sales.
Like Texas they're inspecting wild animals.
Yep, but a lot of that stuff can't leave Texas.
Oh, okay.
You know, so they'll have there's certain legitimately wild game resources like hogs, nilgai that can be inspected in Texas, but they're not suitable for interstate.
Gotcha.
So they're all consumed in state. And there the state has done like what we're talking about. The state has built up capability and complied with demand of an industry that's like, hey, we have this resource, we'd like to fit you to, we're petitioning you to figure out how to inspect it.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be very expensive for the producer because you need to pay the inspector.
Yeah.
So that hasn't happened with
squirrels and rabbits.
Squirrels and rabbits, bro.
I'm just trying to think about my retirement.
So if you let's say Brody starts this squirrel and rabbit place up, and all of a sudden he's down there at what's that place, that gravel parking lot where all the food trucks are. Brody's down there. He's like, Brody's Wild Squirrel Tacos, and you're driving by and you see that, you think to yourself, that's not my problem.
But it could become. Okay. So, it depends on how successful his business is and what impact they would have to the squirrel and rabbit population. So right now, those species are unregulated. You can hunt them 24/7, 365 without a license, with no bag limit right now.
Because demand is so low.
Exactly. But
is that the reason? I thought the reason is because they were non-natives and they're classified as
snowshoe hares, pine squirrels, cottontail rabbits,
badgers.
They're not non-native. Red fox.
Yeah. Okay, now you didn't mention all of those.
You could be both.
You thought pine squirrels are non-native?
No, I thought the fox squirrels.
So think about.
No, he's having a pine squirrel taco.
Oh, fox squirrels too.
So to your point, like we may have a fishing regulation on a body of water where unlimited take of, say, northerns or something like that. That doesn't mean they're there and there's a huge population. That's what sometimes the public thinks. That's because we don't want them there. And so harvest as many as you want. The non-regulation, it just kind of depends. It's whether or not the public values it and what the interest is. You guys keep pushing squirrel hunting here as a great pastime. Eventually, squirrel harvest is going to increase, right? Because all the people, and maybe we might have to regulate it. Typically, laws aren't created to anticipate a problem. It happens, but rarely. It's usually in response to a problem. And so
someone pointed out to me the inherent lag.
Oh, there is for sure.
There's a problematic lag where, especially with technological issues, someone once pointed out that like technologies are adopted quicker than legislation can address them, which creates conflict.
Sometimes they try and get ahead, but I think it's hard to justify or garner support for a law that is addressing a problem that isn't there or isn't, as prolific as we think it is. So government definitely in that way is slow to respond, and there's a process. Our legislature only meets every 2 years. It takes building support, and how it kind of works is typically the legislature makes a law, but it's not very descriptive or it's not very specific. It's saying we a lot of times it's we authorize this executive branch department to regulate this thing. They need to make rules on how to regulate. So then the Wildlife Commission will create those rules, and then we'll implement new laws, and then it'll change based on how that implementation went. So that lag or time it takes to implement or regulate something can take multiple years or a while.
Yeah, and there's like a fine tuning, and it gets frustrating to people. I remember the first time, it was long, long ago, the first time two-way communications.
Mm-hmm.
It was very blanket. And it would have basically been that, and I remember one of the arguments was, I could be hunting with my 80-year-old father, and I can't put him in his blind and give him a walkie-talkie to let me know if he's having a heart attack.
Right.
And then the next year, right, they tweak it, and then you eventually hit on a spot that everyone can agree with. I think that some people look at those and they get mad.
Sure.
And don't look at those as, hey, we're figuring this thing out and kind of fine-tuning what we mean. Similar thing with trail cams. For like Montana, no mention of trail cams. Then it was, I think it went no trail cams. Then it came back and clarified cellular trail cams, right? And then people get like, well, by God, make up your mind. And you kind of be like, we're trying. We're trying to make up our mind and figure out where the technology is going, how people are using them, and we'll hopefully hit on a thing that's livable for everybody. And
we don't want to change the rules every year. I mean, I, as a recreationist hunter, don't want the rules to change every year because I get confused, and it takes time to get updated on those and educated. And so those decisions where regulations are changed or tweaked, there's a lot of discussion and planning that involves attorneys, game managers, wildlife commission, legislatures, all those, involved in the decision-making process. And there's a lot of feedback loop. Most regulation changes that we implement, unless it's just a clarification, there's a whole public scoping effort that goes behind it too, where we get the public's opinion. If we were to make this illegal, if we were to put in this regulation, how would it impact you? What's your opinions on it? Do you support it? Do you not? Should we tweak it? That's a huge part of the process also. But like I said, our job is to implement it, enforce it, and sometimes the feedback we get or the implementation goes sideways or it needs some tweaking. We send that back up, and then laws can be changed or adjusted based on that.
It bummed me out to see. I'm curious if it had any implications for you out in the field. The state relaxed its salvage requirements, its game meat salvage requirements.
On what?
Well, they went from, so it used to be like bird, a mallard size or bigger. You had to retain legs and wings, teal, whatever, however they spelled it out. But it basically, if you killed a Canada goose at a time, a few years ago, you had to keep the wing and the leg. I think they brought everything to breast, right?
I thought it was just leg and thigh.
Leg and thigh. If it was a duck size or bigger,
it
was spelled out.
Teal size or bigger, I think is what it was.
It was like, I kind of like the precision of it. Was that a thing?
And specified like rib meat and neck meat.
Yep.
And that was an interesting one too, because I was living in Idaho at the time. And all of a sudden you weren't required to keep rib meat or neck meat, and then I started.
You mean on a deer?
On a deer milk, yeah.
Rib meat, neck meat on duck be tough.
Yeah. There's some salvage requirements. Like there was hunting units in Alaska. There was a salvage requirement on the liver, and there's a salvage requirement on couldn't bone your meat in the field.
Well, I remember you were saying because
you just did something to destroy your microphone. You broke it.
Oh, I remember when we were in Alaska one time, because you have to salvage rib meat on caribou, whatever. you said they'll often when they're flying, they'll look down at the carcass to see if that rib meat has been stripped.
Well, this is a long time ago.
Hypothetically.
I used to hunt with a dude named Chuck. And Chuck once had a job out on the Alaska Peninsula. Just a young kid. He didn't know what the hell was going on. And he encountered folk whose practice was to make the carcass look good from the air.
Right. Because that could
bone the top side
Mm-hmm.
real good, so that from the air it looked like it had been cleaned up. And then fling everything off. And the outfitter was like, just make it look real good up there and just fling it in the bushes. And then if someone flies over, it looks like someone pulled the rib meat off it.
Yeah.
Oh, I worked under a outfitter in New Mexico who one time showed up to help pack an elk out, which he was not happy about. And I had to ask him to just stop trying to bone the elk. And he explained to me 2 or 3 times the exact cuts that need to be taken in order to make it legal. Like, no, you need to take the loin. Basically, why are you taking all of this shit?
Yeah.
And was very frustrated that he thought at some point that would end up on his back. It was horrible.
Did that rule change have any real implications? Like, was that a thing you would encounter a lot in the field? Arguing with people about, well, you're supposed to take the leg on that one, but not the leg on that one? Or was it kind of a non-point for you?
I mean, it wasn't a huge issue, but definitely cases where we'd find, dozens of whatever bird dumped in a dumpster and only breasted out was really common, and thighs not being taken or something.
And at
else.
a point in time, that would have been your problem.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I want to talk about entrapment for a minute. This isn't even entrapment. We had a guy write in. So do you think about a game warden in Arkansas as your colleague, or is that too far away?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
we had a guy write in. This is just his version of the story.
Everyone has a story like this of
his version of the story is that here he is. This isn't entrapment. I don't know what it is. Here's his version of the story. I don't even know who the hell this guy is. He's cleaning a duck, talking to a game warden. Let's just say this is true. He's cleaning a duck, talking to a game warden, and he gets to a part in his duck cleaning process where he's committing an illegal act because he needs to leave a fully feathered head or a fully feathered wing attached to the carcass until he gets it to its final place, to his abode. So the warden watches him remove the wing and head and then says, "Ha! Gotcha!" Now, how would you handle a situation like that? Like, would you have said, do you feel personally, you would have said, the minute you do that.
It's hard to Monday morning quarterback in a situation like this.
I knew you were going to be evasive.
I'm not there.
I knew you were going to be evasive.
Well,
because you don't want to sell this game warden that you don't even know.
No, well, there's a lot of thoughts. One, every situation has a lot of nuance and detail. And
not this one. I just told you what happened.
Well, how long? How meticulous?
No, you told him what this guy said happened.
Did he grab that bird and just snap it right in front of him, or was he being meticulous and careful? And the warden was watching him for 20 minutes, really clean this thing up.
Was he like, now I'm going to remove the head?
Yeah, exactly.
Game warden's like, all right.
What was he watching the prior hour or 2 hours or days about this group of hunters,
So it makes me, I've had a conversation with my son a lot lately as he complains about referees in football or teachers that now don't allow him to eat in class when he always used to be able to. And I tell him, which I tell others, don't take my inaction or the person of authority's inaction as permission. Okay. Don't take just because the police officer didn't pull you over that one time or didn't give you a ticket last time, meaning now you have permission to do this thing forever. But people get in this rut. Well, like last time I did it and the cop didn't do anything.
Yeah, I always speed down this road.
Yeah, exactly. You guys never seem to care about this rule in the past, Do you
get that argument from people?
All the time, You never cared that we camped in this spot. Well, now our priorities changed and we're addressing it because it's becoming a huge issue. But in that instance, again, I don't know the circumstance, how quick the interaction happened. it's definitely not entrapment. I mean, entrapment is something
No,
that
I was clarifying that. I didn't think
Okay.
that was entrapment. I have an entrapment question, but it's not like I just have a philosophical question.
There's I have walked up on plenty of people that are gutting animals or tagging in the middle of tagging animals. The last thing I do is check someone's license while they're just getting ready to shoot. Like if Janis sitting in the bushes, I drive by, he's ready to shoot a mule deer. I'm not going to run out there and wave my hand and say, stop, before you shoot that, show me your license. I want to make sure you're legal. I'm going to sit there. I'm going to let him harvest the animal. I'm going to let him do all the dragging work. So, because I don't want to help with that, right? No, I'm kidding. I'm going to let him get all that done, and then I'm going to make sure it's tagged, and then I'm going to go over there and check his animal. And sometimes there may be issues, and sometimes, based on the situation, we may educate, warn, guide them through the process. I can recall driving by on a state section and watching a guy kill a cow elk, walking out there, realizing this was a 19-year-old kid that I just had in hunter education a couple weeks before. And he was totally overwhelmed by himself. He was just freaking out, sweating. He'd just driven by. Cow elk happened to be running by. I mean, just luck. And now he didn't know what to do. He had the tag unvalidated stuffed down the throat of the elk. He'd had no clue how to gut it, and I could have easily wrapped him up for a few minor violations, but I took the time to show him how to gut it, held the legs, made him do the cutting, and then
that's way more valuable than ticketing him. Then he never would have hunted again. Right.
But it depends on the situation. I mean, if your caller is a seasoned veteran who's been hunting for 20 years and he knows the rules, he shouldn't have to be reminded. He shouldn't need that education from the warden. He should just be able to do the right thing, especially when the warden's standing right in front of him. His brain should click and should go, man, warden's right here. I should probably do this right,
Yeah.
In that, in that bird instance,
you Arkansas hillbilly,
Arkansans. Had he just pulled out the hibachi and said, "Sir, get ready for a meal."
Right. So if he was going to cook it right in that instant,
just as this guy's writing the ticket, he's like, "Well, I got a little something for you. I'm gonna eat this raw right now."
So
my favorite.
When I was
all of them
city police officer, I wrote hundreds of tickets a year. I mean, absolutely hundreds. And the average game warden in Montana writes 50 to 100 tickets a year. I remember you telling
me it used to be good for 1,500 tickets a year.
Yeah, you could easily as a traffic cop.
As a traffic cop,
right, because that's all you're doing. You're out of the call rotation. Your job is to write traffic tickets, enforce traffic law. And so, I'd average 10, 12 tickets a shift, a 10-hour shift. You multiply it out. There's some vacations and training in there, but you could easily go over 1,000 tickets a year. Game warden, I think the most I've ever written is around 100. Most of our guys average less than that. Huge amount of education that occurs, huge amount of mentorship that occurs, warnings out there. It's just, we're not out there to jam people up. We're out there to get you to do the right thing. A good day for us is a day where we don't write any tickets because that means everybody around us was doing the right thing. I'd love for an instance where my job becomes obsolete. That would be amazing for society, that law enforcement is no longer needed because everyone...
that's far out?
As long as there's otters around, man.
I know. Will we be hunting grizzly bears before then?
I want to... Okay, I got one more thing I want to ask about. It's... A colleague of yours named Eric Crawford, we discussed this one time, at Idaho Warden. We spent a lot of time talking about the robo deer. And he's got all these hilarious stories about robo deer.
Sure.
Including people who, even when the warden shows up, he's still in disbelief that this is not an actual deer.
Mm-hmm.
But he had pointed out that they deliberately don't use trophy class animals.
Yeah, it's the same for us.
I disagree. Why in the world is it okay for a guy to, why not have it be a 200-inch mule deer? Because then you're really finding out what people are made of.
True.
Because if not, you're just selecting meat hunters. You're just getting meat hunters in trouble.
I mean, it's the idea. It's everyone's going to be like, nah, this is too good to be true.
His thing was that everybody's going to shoot at it if it's a 200-inch mule deer. Come on, that's you can't give up like that.
Definitely. Usually, we're targeting a specific violation. So it typically doesn't have to do with trophy harvest. It typically has to do with shooting from the road, trespassing, shooting an animal that the season may be closed. Maybe, there's no cow harvest.
You haven't said
allowed in
anything
the area.
convincing to me yet.
Yep. And so typically that's what we're targeting. We don't have point restrictions in Montana in any of our districts. And so, the thing we have used before would be a spike would be the closest thing to a trophy,
That is just not. That's wrong.
Does Montana have
Put a giant buck out there and see what happens?
Does Montana have a version of the I think it's called the Samson law, like where if you poach an animal of a certain size, the consequences are greater?
Yep, absolutely.
There is one.
Absolutely. So, so there's trophy restitution built into our statute. If you kill a trophy bull elk, it's $8,000. And that's excluding the cost of whatever violation, the ticket you wrote. So
Just the state, like, where they're like, we got $8,000 into that thing.
Yep.
By this point.
That's kind of, when the legislature passed that, they looked at basically what it costs to replace that animal. What's the value to society, what it costs if we were to try and replace it. The smallest thing would be like a fish is $10, and the highest is a bighorn sheep was $30,000. Those amounts aren't automatic. The court would have to award it, and we rarely see those top dollars. But
really? But I want to get back to this.
Steve, I got to tell you this real quick.
Help me understand why not a huge buck.
Just real quick. Way back when, I was working construction in Missoula. My buddy and I go out hunting for the weekend. We'd already killed some elk during archery season. But we're driving out of this area, and it's like, kind of that November time frame where there's a lot of people road hunting. And we look up on the hillside, and there's a spike bull elk sitting there. We're like, oh, look at that. And barely touched the brakes, just kind of kept going. The next day on the job site, one of the kind of general foreman type dudes is complaining loudly to everybody that he and his wife were out hunting. And she swears she shot at a cow off the road out the window. And it was not as it seemed.
No kidding.
Oh, yeah.
Steve, you've never gotten horn fever?
But that's what I'm saying. Like, let's say I get horn fever. Stick it to me.
But then we're starting to target people who normally would do the right thing, and just in the moment,
that's who you need to
they
test.
make a bad decision. We're out there to get true poachers. We're not out there to make poachers out of people or people into poachers.
But the whole thing in the New Testament about like Judas and stuff, man. You got to test like the true believers.
Well, and decoys do. All the time, it's
Maybe
amazing.
they do.
I think deer decoys should
Maybe
be
they
huge bucks,
Steve,
man.
maybe they do use them. They're just not telling.
Oh, they're being coy? He's being coy?
Think of how many 200-inch mule deer racks you'd have to replace every year. People shooting the antlers off.
They're so buck fever, they're going to blow the tines off.
Have you tackled the open fields doctrine? I think that would be a great one.
No. Go ahead. I don't even know enough about it to ask. Oh, yeah. Go ahead and ask him that. Then I got a final thing I want to do, but do that.
The grand scope of things, right, is wildlife belongs to all of us, right? And it's managed by the states in like a trust fashion for the public. Wildlife spends a lot of time on public ground. It spends a lot of time on private ground. It does not recognize the existence of a 3-strand barbed wire fence that separates private from public. However, on private property rights are such that the Montana's a different state, but the way the law is interpreted in many areas is law enforcement can enter onto private property without the express permission of the landowner or the landowner's agent if they see illegal behavior or suspicious behavior in the open fields.
Okay.
Meaning something visible versus something they can't just like walk into your barn or your home without a warrant to do so signed by a judge.
Yeah. I mean, he's driving down the road and he looks out in a picked cornfield and there's some guys with decoys set up. And like they're blasting away before legal shooting light or after legal shooting light. You can go out there. And the guy can't say, "Hey, you're trespassing, go get a search warrant."
Right.
Or whatever.
Yes. Was that close enough?
Kind of. So Montana still has plain view, basically.
Plain view.
So as if something illegal is in plain view, we're in a place that we're allowed to be, a public space, and we can plainly see without any search or manipulation.
Meaning like a county road.
Yep. So think of a traffic stop or something like that a police officer does, and they see contraband in the back seat of the car. They're in a public space. They have the authority to be there and stop that vehicle. And there's something in the car that's totally illegal, maybe a big kilo of cocaine. They could seize that in most areas without a search warrant. More than likely, they're going to get a search warrant to protect them. And it's the same way with hunting and fishing rules. If we were to observe from a public place we're allowed to be, a true articulable violation occurring in front of us, we could enter, stop that, seize it. To conduct a search of the property or anything, we'd have to search warrant. Or if we just see someone harvest, say, an antelope on private property, we see no violation and we're in a public space, the thing you're thinking about is I couldn't enter that private property without permission just to check or regulate that hunter.
You cannot.
No, I would,
because you didn't clearly see anything.
I would have to see a violation or have permission to be on that.
But if it was an antelope season,
correct, so a clear articulable violation, I could. You know, an evolution like we're talking about, evolution of laws is across the United States. Game wardens in many states were giving basically an exigency clause to search and seizure.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the first 8 game wardens in the state of Montana. Again, they lived up in a cabin in the middle of the woods. Transportation was not very efficient at the time, horseback or whatever they had. So their access to the courts was pretty limited. And so if they're way up in the middle of the woods and a violation occurs, they were given the authority to search tents, coolers, all these things without a search warrant because 1, the evidence was perishable, and 2, they didn't have good access to the courts. And so they needed to be able to seize things on the spot. Well, technology has changed. You know, we have judges that are on call 24/7. We can text and email them for search warrants and stuff. Our transportation, we can easily get to the courts, get to our police stations or conservation stations very easily. And so as the technology has changed, the excuse or reason law enforcement uses to not get search warrants is diminished. And the courts have continually protected personal property at a higher value, particularly in the West in Montana. And so it's difficult for us to say like, oh, we had to seize this thing because we couldn't get the search warrant because it's too inconvenient, because when it is pretty easy for us to get one.
Got it.
And so in most cases now, we're going to always defer to that search warrant to protect the integrity of the case so that there is no challenge to our search and seizure.
It's a theme, though, that always comes up, right? It's does the regulation of a public resource, wildlife, stop at the private property boundary?
Yeah.
And the answer is no, but how do you regulate that resource and then still respect all the other laws that are in place regarding private property and everything else?
And we run into that, take enforcement out of it and talk about just general management, to be able to do surveys or go and respond to issues on private property where wildlife exists. There can be contention there if the private property landowner is not going to allow permission. But for the most part, we work with landowners. We get that permission. We let them know the work we're going to do, the legitimacy of it. But it can get in the way if you were to have a landowner that said, no access. And now you have a population of wild animals that it's difficult to get to manage.
I want to close with a game, and I'll go and you go, and then anybody else who wants to go can go. I'm going to do a thing where I give you a tip as a game warden, and you give me a tip as a hunter angler.
Okay.
All right. You already do this tip, so I'm speaking broadly to the profession. I feel that one of the reasons, like one of the things I appreciate about you as a person, I feel like you are sort of like rooting for the people.
Mm-hmm.
That you kind of, that you're kind of rooting for people hunting and fishing. You're hoping they're having a good time, right?
Yeah.
And I feel that you are open to helping people interpret things, trying to help them be on the right side, right? I have had encounters where I just haven't felt that was the case.
Sure.
And I appreciate that. I appreciate that, like, hey, heads up, or let me know if you have any questions, or, that you're really good about public communication and clarifying stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's the thing that I know a lot of hunters and anglers appreciate, is that to be in a spot where, when you run into a game warden, you're going to learn some things. They might be like, heads up. Like, I remember Janis had a guy one time say, that hunter's orange you have is getting pretty old. I'm not going to give you a ticket right now, but if you wash that one more time, I'm going to call that not hunter's orange. Right? And like, I think that those exchanges are really valuable for people, where you sort of get like, oh, these guys, they're not like trying to, they're not trying to throw me in jail, man. They're trying to be like a good referee.
Yeah.
So now you give me a tip. Not me personally, but give hunters a tip. Like when you're walking up, how do you know when you're going to have a good interaction, and how do you know when it's just not going to go good?
Well, a good place to start is golden rule.
Okay.
Treat others if you want to be treated, and that goes for us and the hunters.
Mm-hmm.
So we should walk up and treat people with respect, and they need to do the same. I think it's real important for everyone in society to have an outward mindset, to think of, to be able to put yourself in the other's shoes and understand their perspective, the position they're in,
Mm-hmm.
And give them almost the benefit of the doubt until there is no reason to.
Yeah.
I have a lot of faith in my fellow man, a lot of faith in humanity, that most of us are trying to do the right thing. And so that's how I approach those interactions with hunters. I'd like hunters, anglers, the general public to approach us the same way. There's a lot of stories of people in authority doing bad things.
Yeah.
But when you take the percentage of those compared to the percentage that are doing good, staying out of the headlines, it's the same as any other industry. There's bad doctors, there's bad lawyers, there's bad school teachers, there's bad humans. But most of us are doing the right thing and just trying to go day by day and do our jobs and make the world a better place. And that's what most law enforcement are doing. But so if we walk up and you start giving us a hard time or treating us with disrespect, it's going to go bad for you. We're going to switch immediately from education to paying close attention to everything that's going on with you.
And personal safety factors.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like, oh, hey, here's 6 guys. They all got guns. I'm going to go see how they're doing.
So hey, we're all human. Treat each other with respect. That's huge, Yeah. That's one tip. Yeah.
Has anybody got any more tips for him?
I think he does a pretty good job.
Sure. Tell me what I'm doing wrong.
No, nothing. Nothing. I just really, like I said, I love those. And I'm not, it's not a leniency thing. It's just, I guess I'm maybe more than some. I'm like, I like the feedback and the.
If Steve was a game warden, he would be a hard ass.
No, I wouldn't.
He would just be like,
I'd just focus on kids, man. I'm like, how old are you again? You sure you're not 13?
Well, and as we talked about, there's been an evolution. There's a starting of our profession to be very based on rules and enforcement. That's the way, wildlife conservation started. And now it's more on management. And there's also a huge education and mentorship part of it. And, I think the reason why we have such high compliance is because of that relationship we've built, that trust, that mentorship, and again, that value that's been established or ingrained in society of, we value this resource. It's a public resource, which means it's mine. I don't want to disrespect it. I own it. I don't want to break my own stuff. And I get really upset and protective when other people break my stuff.
Yeah.
We don't view wildlife as the government's thing. As soon as it becomes the government's, plenty of people are willing to destroy it. Look at Forest Service signs out there all
Yeah, no, I
around the
understand.
property, you know. They have no respect for it. But if you start thinking about those Forest Service signs as your own, if I shoot it, my tax dollars have to replace it. You might be a little bit more protective of it, you know. And that's same with wildlife. Every time someone poaches, they're taking an opportunity away from everyone at this table and everyone who enjoys wildlife, whether or not you're a hunter or just a wildlife watcher. And as long as we can keep that attitude and instill it, I think we'll have very high compliance on our wildlife rules.
Great. Well, my message to all the listeners out there is one, man, there's a lot of information available. It's good to find out ahead of time information. Which when I was a kid, we did not do much of. I remember being periodically shocked when someone says, you know, that's actually illegal, right? All the time, man.
Yeah.
So I think finding stuff out and not being afraid to ask questions. I don't think you should call them up personally, but just ask questions.
Yeah. The last big thing that I wanted to mention here is a plug for public participation in the enforcement of wildlife laws.
Okay.
So, you know, every state has some sort of Crime Stoppers program where basically there's hotlines and tip hotlines set up for various crimes, drug dealings, wildlife poaching, all those type of things across the United States and more than likely across the world. There's very few game wardens for how big this state is and for how big most other states are and how many hunters, anglers are and how much wildlife there is out there. Each game warden in Montana patrols a district on average of 2,000 square miles. They can't keep an eye on everything. And so it takes public participation for us to be successful. And like we just mentioned, you know, you as the public own this wildlife resource. The government doesn't. The elected officials don't. The agency doesn't. You own them. So take a hand in protecting it. What we need is good tips. We need public participation, people standing up when they see something wrong, they see a poaching happening, they call us and give us the information. In Montana, we have a program, we call it the TIP-MONT program, Turn In Poachers Montana. It's a 1-800 number, 1-800-TIP-MONT, TIP-MONT.
Is that a pretty valuable tool for you guys?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's not as you just mentioned, call and ask a question on a regulation line. It's not a line to call and get your bobcat tagged, but it's a line to report tips. They can be anonymous if you want, on wildlife poaching, wildlife crimes that are occurring. It could be the restaurants, commercialization, could be someone taking a trophy animal out of district, all sorts of things you could report to us. You can remain anonymous. You can also be eligible for cash rewards if there's a conviction or an arrest that occurs with that case. Some other states, interesting enough, like Utah, are actually starting to award tags for turning in poachers.
Really?
So in Utah, yeah, you can turn in a poacher on whatever, an elk or sheep tag, and as long as it's biologically sustainable and the department supports it, you could skip the cash reward and get a limited draw tag for your reward for that area for whatever species.
That might be
turned
the
into.
fastest way to get a tag in
That's
Utah.
going to perk some people up, man. Yeah, wow. Really?
It doesn't exist in Montana right now, but we have cash rewards. And two, again, it's doing the right thing.
That kind of brings up, like, is it entrapment if it's all civilians involved?
Well, I'm
going to put that big buck out in Steve's yard.
So I think about, I don't have the exact quote in my head, but Aldo Leopold wrote about how, hunting and fishing is a sport in a way where you are your own referee. When you're playing football or basketball, there's a referee walking around, following you, calling a penalty on you every time you do it. We don't have that in hunting and fishing. We have to hold ourselves accountable and those around us to do it the right way, to protect it for the long term, and to limit abuse. And also, we talked about what is regulation, where do laws come from? Problems. So the more we can do the right thing, ethically, sustainable, the less rules will be created that will interfere with our enjoyment of this resource.
I got you. Don't push everything to the...
Absolutely. Yeah. Just do it the right way. Help us out. But give us a call. If you know of some poaching that's occurring in the area, please. We really need those tips. And we make some amazing cases based on citizen involvement.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, man.
Absolutely.
We are going to start that Ask a Game Warden up. If it's people live call in. See how it goes.
Well, I'm sure it could get Western.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
I'm with Fish and Game. Be careful where you aim. Don't shoot a deer that's tame. Don't try to shift the blame. We'll find out your name. We've got 4 tracks and airplanes. Don't bring your family shame. The police blotter's not a claim to fame. Don't claim that you were framed. Don't mess with Fish and Game. With Fish and Game. Don't fish with a seine. Don't make a bogus claim. We have helicopters and trucks with chains. Our officers are well trained on horses like John Wayne. Don't break the law in vain. Find the bird you maimed. We have a reputation to maintain. Don't mess with Fish and Game. Don't mess with Fish and Game. Don't mess with Fish.